The moment Ryan Mercer's banking app flashed insufficient funds, rent payment declined, he knew his carefully constructed life was about to collapse. Around him, Horizon Digital Systems' mandatory holiday party blazed with forced cheer, champagne towers, string quartets, executives in designer suits pretending to care about people they'd never spoken to. Ryan needed to disappear before anyone noticed the panic sweating through his shirt. But then she appeared, cutting through the crowd like a blade. Victoria Hale, the new CEO famous for dismantling entire departments before lunch. Her eyes locked on his with unsettling precision. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice low and absolute. "We need to talk. Now." Before we dive into Ryan's story of survival and unexpected salvation, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this one grabs you, hit that like button so I know to bring you more stories about second chances and the people brave enough to offer them. The Horizon Digital Systems' 23rd floor had been transformed into something between a winter wonderland and a corporate fever dream. Ice sculptures melted slowly under heat lamps, their dripping forms casting strange shadows across marble floors. A string quartet played Vivaldi near floor-to-ceiling windows that framed downtown Chicago's glittering skyline, each building a monument to success that felt impossibly distant to Ryan Mercer as he stood near the emergency exit, phone clutched in his trembling hand. The notification had arrived at 8:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes into a party he'd only attended because Human Resources had sent 3 increasingly pointed emails about mandatory attendance and team-building opportunities. His landlord's automated payment system had tried to process December rent. His account had $847. Rent was $1,650. The math was simple. The consequences weren't. Ryan's thumb hovered over his banking app, refreshing the screen as if the numbers might magically change. They didn't. Behind the insufficient funds alert sat a cascade of upcoming automatic payments: utilities, student loans, car insurance, the minimum payment on a credit card he'd sworn he'd never use, but had maxed out 3 weeks ago buying groceries and gas. Each payment scheduled like a line of dominoes, and he'd just watched the first one fail to fall. His dress shirt, the good one, the one he'd bought 2 years ago when he'd gotten promoted to junior analyst and thought his life was finally stabilizing, felt too tight across his chest. The knot of his tie seemed to be slowly strangling him. Around him, colleagues laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, drinking champagne that probably cost more per bottle than Ryan had in his account, celebrating another successful fiscal year for a company where Ryan was increasingly certain he wouldn't see another month. "You look like you're about to bolt." Ryan's head snapped up. Marcus Chen from accounting stood beside him, holding 2 champagne flutes and wearing the expression of someone who'd attended too many of these events and developed a survivor's instinct for spotting fellow sufferers. "Just getting some air," Ryan said, forcing his voice to sound casual despite the way his heart hammered against his ribs. Marcus extended one of the glasses. "Air's on the balcony. You're standing by the fire exit like you're planning an escape route. Trust me, I've been there. These things are torture, but they end eventually. Drink, smile, avoid the executive floor, go home." Ryan accepted the champagne because refusing would draw more attention than accepting. The glass felt impossibly delicate in his hand, like everything else in his life, one wrong move away from shattering. "Thanks," he managed. "Don't thank me yet." That's the cheap stuff they put out at 9 o'clock when they figure everyone's drunk enough not to notice the quality drop. Marcus grinned, but his eyes held understanding. "Seriously, though, you okay? You've seemed off lately." Off. That was generous. Ryan had been barely functional for weeks, maybe months. The edges had started blurring together after Sarah left. Sarah. Even thinking her name felt like touching a bruise that wouldn't heal. "Just tired," Ryan said. Long quarter. It wasn't a lie. The 4th quarter had been brutal. Extended hours, weekend work, projects that shifted requirements midstream while deadlines remained fixed. But that wasn't what had hollowed him out. That wasn't why he'd lost 12 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. Why he'd started keeping emergency instant coffee in his desk drawer because he couldn't afford the coffee shop anymore. Why he flinched every time his phone buzzed with what might be another automated payment failure. Marcus studied him for a moment longer, then seemed to decide not to push. Well, hang in there. Word is the new CEO is going to announce the Q1 strategy tonight. Might be interesting. Ryan nodded, not trusting his voice. Everyone had been talking about Victoria Hale since the board appointed her 3 months ago. She'd come from Sentinel Technologies with a reputation for radical efficiency, which was corporate speak for cutting anything that didn't directly contribute to profit margins. Entire departments had been restructured. Longtime employees had been offered voluntary separation packages that everyone understood weren't voluntary at all. Ryan had been waiting for his turn. Waiting for the email, the meeting invite, the carefully worded conversation about organizational realignment and exploring new opportunities. Maybe tonight would be that night. Maybe that's why his rent had bounced, the universe's way of preparing him for unemployment. Attention, everyone! A voice cut through the party noise, amplified by the room's excellent acoustics. If I could have a moment of your time. The crowd shifted, conversations dying as people turned toward the source. Ryan found himself pulled along by the current of bodies, his champagne glass still untouched, his phone still clutched in his other hand like a lifeline. Victoria Hale stood on the raised platform near the windows, backlit by Chicago's skyline. She was younger than Ryan had expected, maybe early 40s, though it was hard to tell. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly salary. Her dark hair pulled back in a style that was simultaneously severe and elegant. But it was her eyes that caught him. Even from across the room, even through the crowd, they were intense, sharp, and assessing, missing nothing. I know these events aren't everyone's favorite, Victoria began, and a ripple of surprised laughter went through the crowd. Most CEOs opened with platitudes about family and teamwork. But I appreciate you being here. The past quarter has been challenging. You've all worked hard, adapted to changes, and maintained excellence in the face of uncertainty. Ryan felt Marcus tense beside him. Here it comes, Ryan thought. The announcements, the cuts. I've spent the last 3 months reviewing every aspect of our operations, Victoria continued. Not just the numbers on spreadsheets, but the people behind those numbers. The teams that make this company function. And I've noticed something troubling. The room had gone completely silent. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. We have brilliant people here, talented analysts, creative developers, dedicated managers. But I've also seen exhaustion, burnout. People working through illness because they can't afford to take sick days. Employees choosing between paying rent and buying groceries. Team members sleeping in their cars between double shifts. Ryan's chest tightened. His vision seemed to narrow, tunneling until all he could see was Victoria on that platform, speaking words that felt like she was reading directly from the last 6 months of his life. We post record profits while some of you are drowning, Victoria said, and her voice had shifted. Less corporate polish, more raw honesty. That's not sustainable. It's not ethical. And it's not the company I intend to lead. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the script anyone had expected. Starting in January, we're launching several new initiatives. Significant raises for anyone making under $70,000 annually. Expanded health benefits including mental health coverage. An emergency assistance fund for employees facing financial hardship. And an executive mentorship program designed to identify and support talent that might otherwise be lost to circumstances beyond their control. Ryan's hand had gone numb around his champagne glass. His phone felt hot against his palm. Change is uncomfortable, Victoria said, but I've learned something in my career. Companies that invest in their people don't just survive, they thrive. We're going to prove that doing right by employees and maximizing shareholder value aren't mutually exclusive goals, they're interdependent ones. The applause started hesitantly, then built. Ryan couldn't move, couldn't process what he'd just heard. It sounded too good to be true, which in his experience meant it probably was. Now, Victoria continued, raising her voice slightly over the applause, I know that was heavy for a holiday party. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. But if anyone wants to discuss these initiatives in detail, my door is always open. Literally, I've had the lock removed from my office door. I'm here to serve you all, not hide behind executive privilege. More applause. Victoria stepped down from the platform, immediately surrounded by senior managers and directors eager to shake her hand, to align themselves with her vision. Ryan watched her navigate the crowd with practiced ease, smiling at the right moments, saying things he couldn't hear from across the room. Holy shit, Marcus breathed beside him. Did that just happen? I don't know, Ryan said honestly. His phone buzzed. Another notification. Ryan's stomach clenched, certain it would be another failed payment, another domino falling. But when he glanced at the screen, it was just an email, probably spam, or another automated message about the party he was currently attending. He should leave. The speech was over, the announcement made. He'd fulfilled his mandatory attendance obligation. He could slip out now, go home to his apartment that he apparently couldn't afford anymore, and figure out which bills to pay and which to ignore, which creditor to dodge and which to placate with promises he had no way of keeping. Ryan turned toward the exit, ready to disappear into the Chicago night. Mr. Mercer. The voice stopped him cold. Not because it was loud, it wasn't, but because it carried absolute authority, the kind of certainty that made disobedience feel impossible. Ryan turned slowly. Victoria Hale stood 3 feet away, having somehow crossed the entire ballroom and materialized beside him while he'd been staring at his phone. Up close, she was smaller than she'd seemed on the platform, maybe 5'6" compared to his own 6 feet, but her presence filled the space around her like a physical force. Yes? Ryan's voice came out rougher than intended. Victoria's eyes, dark brown, he could see now, with flecks of amber that caught the light, scanned his face with the same intensity he'd noticed earlier. She was reading him, Ryan realized, cataloging details. The too-tight shirt, the phone clutched like a weapon, the champagne glass he'd never drunk from, the barely concealed desperation he'd been trying so hard to hide. "We need to talk," she said, her voice pitched low enough that nearby conversations wouldn't pick up the words. Now. Ryan's throat went dry. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading. She'd noticed his performance slipping, his mistakes accumulating, the way he'd been barely treading water for months. The speech about investing in employees had been general corporate vision. This was specific, personal, terminal. "Of course," he managed. "Should I... Is your office..." "Follow me," Victoria said, already moving. She didn't head toward the elevators that would take them to the executive floor. Instead, she wove through the crowd with purposeful efficiency, nodding at people who tried to catch her attention but never stopping, never slowing. Ryan followed, his mind racing through every interaction from the past 3 months, every project she might have reviewed, every failure she might have discovered. Victoria pushed open a door that Ryan had assumed led to a coat closet. Instead, it opened onto a service hallway, the behind-the-scenes corridors that catering staff and maintenance workers used, stripped of the elegant finishes that decorated the public spaces. Harsh fluorescent lights replaced ambient designer fixtures. The sounds of the party faded behind them. "Ms. Hale," Ryan started, "if this is about the Crawford projection, I can explain it's not about the Crawford projection." Victoria stopped at another door, glanced both ways down the corridor, then opened it. The women's bathroom. Ryan froze. "I don't think... No one's in here. I checked earlier." Victoria held the door open, her expression unreadable. "And we need privacy. Real privacy, not the kind where someone might walk past an office door or a conference room might have its reservation schedule checked. Get in here, Mr. Mercer." Every instinct screamed at Ryan that this was wrong, that following his CEO into a bathroom during a company party violated about 17 different workplace protocols. But something in Victoria's voice, not threatening, but urgent, almost desperate, made him step forward. The bathroom was designed to match the rest of the floor's expensive aesthetic. Marble counters, brass fixtures, individual stalls with floor-to-ceiling doors. Victoria locked the main entrance behind them, the click of the deadbolt unnaturally loud in the enclosed space. "This is insane," Ryan said, finally finding his voice. "Whatever this is about, we should... Sit." Victoria gestured to the upholstered bench near the vanity area, the kind of seating that only appeared in executive-level facilities. Ryan sat. Not because he wanted to, but because his legs had started shaking and standing seemed increasingly difficult. Victoria remained by the door, her back to the locked entrance, her arms crossed. For a long moment she just looked at him, Really looked, the way a doctor might study a patient, cataloging symptoms and calculating diagnoses. "Your rent bounced tonight," she finally said. Ryan's blood turned to ice. "How do you—" "I don't know, not for certain, but I've seen that expression before, that specific combination of panic and calculation." Victoria's voice had softened, losing its CEO edge. "Checking your phone every few minutes, the way you're standing by exits, the too thin frame on someone who used to fill out their suit properly, the untouched champagne because you're afraid if you drink anything, you'll lose control. Assess, Hale, 3 months ago you were flagged in our performance analytics. Nothing dramatic, just small things. Deadlines missed by hours instead of days, reports with minor errors that had to be corrected, projects you used to handle smoothly suddenly requiring extra review cycles." Victoria moved to the vanity, leaning against the marble counter. "The system flagged you for quarterly review, potential underperformer, suggested monitoring." This was it, the termination conversation. Ryan's hands clenched on his knees, his fingernails digging into his palms hard enough to hurt. "I reviewed your file personally," Victoria continued. 3 years with the company, consistent excellence until about 6 months ago. Then a sharp decline, not catastrophic, but noticeable. The pattern matched something I'd seen before. "I can do better," Ryan said, the words coming out too fast. "I know I've been off, but I can fix it. I just need—" "Stop." Victoria held up one hand. "I'm not here to fire you, Ryan. I'm here because I've been watching you circle the drain for weeks, and tonight at that party, I saw you check your phone and go white. I saw the exact moment you realized you couldn't afford rent." Ryan couldn't breathe. The bathroom felt too small, the walls too close. "How did you know?" he whispered. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Something personal, something painful. "Because 17 years ago, I stood in a bathroom just like this one, locked the door, and had a panic attack because my rent had bounced and I didn't know how to tell anyone. Because I'd been working 70-hour weeks while holding down a second job on weekends, and my body had started shutting down. Because my boyfriend had left me with half our shared debts, and I was too proud to ask for help, too scared that admitting I was drowning would mean losing everything I'd worked for." Ryan stared at her. Victoria Hale, CEO, industry legend, woman who'd turned around 3 companies and built a reputation for ruthless efficiency, looked back at him with eyes that understood, really understood. "The difference," Victoria continued, "is that no one noticed I was struggling until I collapsed at my desk and spent 3 days in the hospital. And even then, the help I got was minimal. A few days off, some sympathetic words, then back to the grind with all the same problems and no support system." She reached into her suit jacket and pulled out a plain manila folder, the kind that could contain anything from corporate forms to termination papers. "I swore when I got to a position of power that I wouldn't let that happen to people under my watch," Victoria said. "That speech tonight about investment and support? That wasn't corporate bullshit. That was me trying to build the system that should have existed when I needed it." She held out the folder. Ryan's hand shook as he took it. Inside were forms, official Horizon Digital Systems letterhead, legal language, boxes for signatures. But the heading caught his attention immediately. Executive Mentorship Initiative, Confidential Participant Agreement. "What is this?" Ryan asked. "A lifeline," Victoria said simply. "If you want it." Ryan scanned the forms, his mind struggling to process the words. Salary adjustment. His eyes caught on a number that was nearly double his current compensation. Relocation assistance if needed. Emergency financial support up to $15,000 to address immediate hardship. Monthly stipend for mental health services. Guaranteed position protection for the duration of the program. "This can't be real," Ryan said. "It's real. I've been developing it for 2 months, working with HR and our legal team. You'd be the first participant, the pilot case we'd use to refine the program before expanding it." Victoria moved to sit on the bench beside him, careful to maintain professional distance. "The goal is to identify employees with genuine talent who are being derailed by circumstances beyond their control. Financial hardship, personal crisis, systemic barriers. Things that have nothing to do with capability, but everything to do with resources and support." Ryan read through the requirements. Weekly mentorship meetings, quarterly progress reviews, participation in program development and assessment, confidentiality about the pilot nature until formal company rollout. Why me? He asked. Because your performance history shows you're good at what you do. Because the timeline of your decline maps to personal circumstances, not professional inadequacy. Because when I looked at your analytics, I didn't see someone who couldn't do the work. I saw someone who was doing the work while also fighting a war no one else could see. Victoria's voice was steady, professional, but underneath Ryan heard something raw. And because I wish someone had done this for me 17 years ago. Ryan's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall in front of his CEO in a locked bathroom at a company holiday party. This was insane. All of it. The situation, the offer, the woman beside him who somehow saw through all his carefully maintained walls to the truth underneath. What's the catch? Ryan asked, because there was always a catch. The catch is you have to want it, Victoria said. You have to commit to the program, do the work, be honest about what you need and what's not working. I can provide resources and support, but I can't force you to use them. And you have to trust that this isn't some elaborate corporate scheme to document your failures before terminating you. She leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her hands clasped. I'm betting my reputation on this program, Ryan. If you fail, it reflects on me. The board already thinks I'm too soft, too focused on people instead of pure profit. They gave me 6 months to prove my approach works. If this initiative crashes and burns, if participants don't improve, or if the cost-benefit analysis doesn't justify the investment, I lose credibility, maybe even my position. Then why risk it? Ryan asked. Victoria turned to look at him directly. Because I've seen what happens when companies treat employees as disposable resources. I've seen talented people destroyed by systems that don't care if they're struggling. And I've seen what's possible when you actually invest in human potential instead of just extracting value from it. She stood, straightening her suit jacket. You don't have to decide tonight. Take the folder home. Read everything. If you're interested, the HR contact information is on the last page. They're expecting your call, but only if this is something you genuinely want. Victoria moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the lock. And Ryan, whatever you decide, your job is safe. This isn't conditional employment. You're not being threatened or coerced. If you say no, you continue in your current role with no repercussions. I need you to understand that. Ryan clutched the folder like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. Ms. Hale, Victoria, she said, if we do this, if you accept the mentorship, we'll be working closely together. The formality becomes a barrier at that point. Victoria, Ryan corrected, the name feeling strange in his mouth. Thank you. I can't. You don't have to say anything yet. Just think about it. Victoria unlocked the door, checking the hallway before stepping out. Take care of yourself, Ryan. Seriously. Eat something tonight. Sleep if you can. The world looks different when you're not running on fumes. She left without looking back, disappearing into the service corridor, and presumably back to the party where people were probably wondering where the new CEO had vanished to. Ryan sat alone in the women's bathroom, holding a folder that might contain his salvation or another elaborate corporate trap, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. His phone buzzed again. Another notification, another payment failure. The electric bill this time. But as Ryan stood on shaking legs and made his way out of the bathroom, back through the service corridor, down to the parking garage where his 8-year-old sedan waited with a check engine light he couldn't afford to address. As he did all of that, he kept the folder tucked under his arm. He didn't know if he believed Victoria's offer, didn't know if he was desperate enough or brave enough to accept it. But for the first time in 6 months, sitting in his car in the Horizon Digital Systems parking garage at 10:47 p.m. on a Friday night in December, Ryan Mercer felt something other than panic. He felt possibility. The drive home took 23 minutes through Chicago streets, decorated with holiday lights that seemed simultaneously beautiful and mocking. Ryan lived in a studio apartment in a neighborhood that was politely described as transitional and more accurately characterized as affordable if you're willing to overlook certain issues. His building had functional heating but questionable plumbing, neighbors who worked odd hours and played music at volumes that suggested either hearing loss or aggressive passive aggression, and a landlord who communicated exclusively through automated messages and late fee warnings. Ryan's apartment was on the fourth floor of a building without an elevator. By the time he reached his door, his legs burned and his breath came short. He needed to eat something. Victoria had been right about that. But his refrigerator contained expired milk, half a rotisserie chicken from 4 days ago that probably needed to be thrown out, and condiments that had achieved their own ecosystem. He dropped the folder on his kitchen counter, a generous term for the 2 feet of laminate surface beside his hot plate, and collapsed onto his futon. It served as both couch and bed, bought from a college student on Craigslist who'd sworn it was barely used, despite stains that suggested either epic parties or tragic accidents. Ryan's apartment was roughly 300 square feet of space that felt even smaller thanks to the clutter he'd never quite managed to organize. Moving boxes still lined one wall, though he'd lived here for 8 months. Books he'd bought with ambitious intentions to improve himself sat in precarious stacks. A television he'd owned since grad school perched on a plastic storage bin because he'd never bought proper furniture. This was supposed to be temporary, a place to land after Sarah left, after their shared apartment became unbearable, after the carefully planned life they'd built together had disintegrated in the space of a single afternoon. He'd come home early that day. 6 months ago now, though it felt both more recent and ancient. The note had been on the kitchen counter of their actual apartment, the nice one with real furniture and space to breathe. I can't do this anymore. I need something different. I'm sorry. S. That was it. No explanation, no warning, no conversation. She'd taken half their savings, her half, legally, since they'd never combined accounts despite 3 years together. She'd taken most of the furniture they'd accumulated, claiming she'd paid for more of it, which was probably true but felt like adding injury to insult. She'd taken the security deposit by informing their landlord she was breaking the lease, leaving Ryan scrambling to find a new place on his single salary. And she'd taken something less tangible but infinitely more valuable, his certainty that he was building toward something stable, his belief that if he worked hard and planned carefully and did everything right, life would work out. Ryan had spent 6 months proving that belief wrong. He forced himself off the futon and retrieved the folder from the counter. Victoria's business card was clipped to the front, simple black text on cream stock, her name and a phone number, no title, no email, just the essentials. Ryan opened the folder and read through the forms properly this time, now that his hands had stopped shaking enough to focus on the words. The financial assistance portion alone would solve his immediate crisis. $15,000 to address emergency hardship, enough to cover rent, catch up on bills, fix his car, buy groceries that weren't pasta and canned sauce. The salary adjustment would change everything going forward, from $42,000 annually to $78,000. Life-changing money. The kind of compensation that meant security instead of constant calculation, comfort instead of perpetual crisis. But it was the other elements that made Ryan's chest tight with something that might have been hope. Mental health support, up to 20 sessions annually with a licensed therapist, fully covered. Ryan hadn't seen a therapist since college, hadn't been able to afford it since graduation, and had spent the last 6 months accumulating the kind of damage that probably needed professional attention. Professional development funding, educational opportunities, certifications, conferences. Things that Ryan had put off because every dollar had to go towards survival. And the mentorship itself, weekly meetings with Victoria, access to executive networks, direct involvement in strategic planning. The kind of opportunity that usually required either family connections or incredible luck to access. The requirements were straightforward: maintain acceptable job performance, attend all scheduled mentorship meetings, participate in program assessment, maintain confidentiality until public rollout. Nothing unreasonable. Nothing that would require him to compromise his integrity or become someone he wasn't. The HR contact was a woman named Jennifer Marsh. Her direct number was listed with a note, available 24/7 for program participants. Don't hesitate to call. Ryan checked the time, 11:34 p.m. Too late to call tonight, even with the 24/7 assurance. But he could call Monday morning, could take the weekend to think about it, to decide if this was real or too good to be true. His phone buzzed on the futon cushion beside him. Ryan grabbed it, expecting another payment failure notification. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. "This is Victoria. I know you're probably overthinking everything right now. That's normal. But whatever you're telling yourself about deserving this or whether it's real, stop. You're worth the investment. Sleep on it. Call Jennifer Monday if you're interested." Ryan read the message 3 times, then a fourth. The casual tone, the direct acknowledgement of his likely spiral, the simple assertion that he was worth investing in, it all felt impossibly personal coming from someone who'd been his CEO for 3 months and whom he'd spoken to for maybe 15 minutes total. He typed and deleted 4 different responses before settling on, "Thank you." The response came immediately. "Thank you for not bolting from the party when you obviously wanted to." That took courage. Ryan didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. He set his phone down, returned the folder to the counter, and forced himself to address the immediate problem. He was exhausted, starving, and living in an apartment he apparently couldn't afford. The rotisserie chicken was still safe enough. Ryan picked at it directly from the container, standing at his counter in the dark, because turning on lights required energy he didn't have. The protein helped. His hands stopped shaking. His thoughts began to organize themselves into something resembling order. Monday. He'd called Jennifer Marsh. He'd asked the questions that needed asking, verify that this wasn't some elaborate psychological experiment or corporate trap. He'd figure out the logistics, the expectations, the reality behind the promises. But tonight, Friday night bleeding into Saturday morning, Ryan let himself feel something he hadn't allowed in months. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, everything wasn't going to collapse after all. He fell asleep on his futon, still wearing his suit pants and dress shirt, the folder visible on the counter like a promise or a threat, and dreamed of women's bathrooms and locked doors and CEOs who saw through carefully maintained walls to the truth underneath. Ryan woke Saturday morning to sunlight slicing through his blinds like an accusation and the immediate certainty that he'd overslept for something important. His body jerked upright on the futon, dress shirt twisted around his torso, one arm completely numb from sleeping at an angle that had cut off circulation. The panic lasted 3 full seconds before memory reassembled itself. It was Saturday, there was no work to miss, and the folder on his counter was real. He stood slowly, his back protesting the futon's lack of support, and shuffled to the bathroom that was technically part of his studio, but felt like a closet someone had optimistically installed plumbing in. The mirror showed him exactly what he'd expected. Dark circles that had become permanent fixtures, cheekbones more prominent than they should be, hair that needed cutting but wouldn't get cut because haircuts cost money. He looked like someone losing a fight with life itself. The folder sat on the counter where he'd left it, Victoria's business card still clipped to the front. Ryan made instant coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like regret but contained caffeine, and read through the documents again with morning clarity. The numbers didn't change, the promises remained the same. $78,000 annually, $15,000 emergency support, mental health coverage, professional development, weekly mentorship with the CEO. It still sounded impossible. Ryan's phone showed 3 new notifications, 2 more failed payment attempts overnight, and 1 email from Jennifer Marsh sent at 11:47 p.m. with the subject line, Executive Mentorship Initiative, Resources Available. He opened it with coffee-shaking hands. The email was remarkably straightforward. Jennifer introduced herself as the HR director overseeing the new program, confirmed that Ryan had been identified as a potential participant, and provided 3 attachments: the full program documentation, a confidential financial assistance application, and a calendar link for scheduling an initial consultation. The tone was professional but warm, nothing like the usual corporate HR communications that read like legal disclaimers translated through bureaucracy. At the bottom, a personal note. Ryan, Victoria mentioned you might need this weekend to process everything. That's completely understandable. If you have questions before Monday, my personal cell is 312-557834. Seriously, call anytime. This program exists because we believe in supporting our people, and that starts with being available when you need us. Jennifer Ryan set his phone down and stared at his apartment. The moving boxes still unpacked, the futon that served as all his furniture, The hot plate he used because his kitchen was too small for a real stove. This was survival mode. This was what his life had become, a constant calculation of which necessity to sacrifice so others could be met. The folder represented something different, not just money, though that alone would transform everything. It represented someone seeing him struggle and deciding he was worth saving. Ryan picked up his phone and dialed before he could talk himself out of it. Jennifer answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite it being 8:23 a.m. on a Saturday. Jennifer Marsh. Ms. Marsh, this is Ryan Mercer. I'm sorry for calling on the weekend. I know the email said Monday was fine, but Ryan, stop apologizing. I gave you my personal cell specifically so you could call when you needed to. He heard rustling, the sound of a door closing. I'm glad you reached out. How are you doing? The question was simple but landed with unexpected weight. When was the last time someone had asked how he was doing and actually wanted the truth? Honestly, I'm overwhelmed. This program, the offer, it seems too good to be true. Ryan forced himself to continue. I need to know this is real. That I'm not going to accept help and then discover it comes with conditions that make it impossible, or that it's some kind of performance improvement plan disguised as support. I understand that fear, Jennifer said. And I'm going to be completely transparent with you because that's how this program has to work. Yes, it's real. Yes, the support is genuine. Victoria has been developing this for months, working with legal and finance to ensure every element is sustainable and scalable. You're the pilot participant, which means we're learning as we go, but the resources are allocated and approved. What's the failure rate? Ryan asked. If I accept this and it doesn't work, what happens? Jennifer was quiet for a moment. We don't have a failure rate yet because you'd be the first. But I can tell you what we've built into the program. If a participant genuinely engages with the support systems and still doesn't improve, we assess why. Is it a mismatch of role and skills? Is it external circumstances that need different intervention? Is it something we didn't anticipate in program design? The goal isn't to set you up to fail, it's to figure out what success requires and then provide it. And if I'm just not good enough? The question came out quieter than Ryan intended. Then we wouldn't have selected you. Jennifer's voice was firm. Ryan, I've reviewed your entire file. Your performance history before 6 months ago was exemplary. Strong project delivery, positive peer reviews, consistent growth. The decline maps precisely to personal circumstances, not professional capability. You're not failing because you can't do the work. You're struggling because you're trying to do the work while fighting battles no one else sees. Ryan's throat tightened. He pressed his palm against his kitchen counter, grounding himself in the physical reality of laminate and coffee mug. What do I need to do? He asked. First, breathe. Second, if you're ready to move forward, we start with the Emergency Financial Assistance application. It's confidential, processed through a separate system from standard HR, and designed to address immediate hardship. Then we schedule your first mentorship meeting with Victoria. She's suggested Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m., before the rest of the office arrives for privacy. And we get you connected with our mental health provider network to set up initial sessions. 7 a.m. meetings. Ryan's current schedule barely got him to the office by 8:30, and that was after skipping breakfast and taking the fastest route through Chicago traffic. I can't afford to miss work for therapy appointments, Ryan said. You won't have to. The program includes flexible scheduling. Therapy during work hours is covered as part of your professional development time. We're not asking you to sacrifice more of your personal life to get support. We're building support into your work life. Ryan closed his eyes. This was real. It was actually impossibly real. Okay, he said. I'm in. What's first? Jennifer walked him through the financial assistance application over the phone, her questions direct but never invasive. Outstanding rent. $1,650 for December, plus late fees. Overdue utilities, $340. Car repairs that couldn't be delayed, $870. Credit card minimum payments to avoid default, $425. Groceries and basic necessities, the total came to $3,585 in immediate crisis, with the full $15,000 providing buffer for January and February while his salary adjustment processed. The application requires Victoria's approval since she's your assigned mentor, but that's a formality, Jennifer explained. Funds typically disperse within 48 hours of approval. Given your situation, I'll mark this urgent. You should see the transfer by Monday afternoon. Monday, Ryan repeated. His rent was due yesterday. His landlord's automated system would be generating late fee notices and threatening letters that would arrive early next week. I'm going to send you a draft letter to provide your landlord explaining a processing delay with your bank, Jennifer said, reading his mind. It's vague enough to not require disclosure, but official enough to buy you a few days. We found these situations need both financial support and practical tools for managing immediate consequences. After 40 minutes, the application was complete. Jennifer scheduled his first mentorship meeting, Tuesday, 7 a.m., Victoria's office, and provided contact information for 3 therapists who had immediate availability and specialized in workplace stress and financial trauma. One more thing, Jennifer said. Victoria wanted me to emphasize this. You're not alone in this process. If something isn't working, if you need additional support, if the program structure needs adjustment, speak up. This initiative only succeeds if we're responsive to what participants actually need, not what we assume they need. Ryan thanked her and ended the call, then sat in his apartment's overwhelming silence for 5 full minutes, processing what had just happened. He'd woken up this morning in crisis. Now, somehow, he had a path forward. His phone buzzed with an email from Jennifer, the landlord letter template, the therapist contact list, and a calendar invite for Tuesday at 7 a.m. titled simply Mentorship Meeting, Confidential. Well, Ryan spent Saturday doing things he'd been putting off because they required energy he hadn't possessed. Laundry in the building's basement machines, actual grocery shopping beyond pasta and canned goods, cleaning his apartment until it resembled a space where a functional adult might live. The physical activity helped burn off the nervous energy that Victoria's offer had generated. Every time his mind started spiraling into doubt, this is too good to be true, you'll mess this up, you don't deserve this, he forced himself to focus on concrete tasks, fold shirts, organize books, scrub the bathroom. By Sunday evening, his apartment looked marginally more habitable and his body felt the exhaustion of actual work rather than constant anxiety. He drafted emails to his landlord using Jennifer's template and his credit card company requesting a late fee waiver due to processing delays. He'd made an appointment with a therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen for Thursday afternoon, the first opening she had. He'd reviewed the mentorship program documentation until he could recite the requirements in his sleep. And he thought about Victoria standing in that bathroom, telling him about her own collapse 17 years ago, offering him the help she'd never received. Monday morning arrived with Chicago's particular brand of December cold, the kind that cut through clothing and made every breath visible. Ryan dressed carefully, choosing his second-best suit since the good one still smelled like panic sweat from Friday's party. He arrived at Horizon Digital Systems at 7:45, earlier than usual, and found his desk exactly as he'd left it, monitors dark, ergonomic chair adjusted to compensate for the cheap futon's damage to his back, picture frame he'd never replaced after removing the photo of Sarah. His computer booted slowly, giving him time to observe the office coming to life around him. Marcus from accounting waved as he passed, carrying coffee that smelled expensive. A few other early arrivals moved through the space with Monday morning efficiency, focused on their own priorities. Ryan's email showed the usual Monday accumulation: project updates, meeting invites, automated reports. But at 9:17 a.m., a new message appeared from Jennifer Marsh with the subject line, Financial Assistance Approved. His hands trembled as he opened it. The message was brief. Victoria had approved the emergency assistance application within 2 hours of submission on Saturday. Funds would be dispersed today by 3 p.m. Jennifer had attached confirmation documentation and instructions for the direct deposit. Ryan read the email 3 times to be certain he wasn't misunderstanding. By this afternoon, his rent would be covered, his utilities paid, his car fixed. The immediate crisis that had been drowning him for weeks would be resolved. He wanted to cry. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to stand up in the middle of the office and scream that maybe, possibly, everything might actually be okay. Instead, he pulled up the Crawford projection he'd botched 2 weeks ago and started fixing it properly. By lunch, Ryan had revised 3 reports that needed attention, responded to emails he'd been avoiding, and scheduled catch-up meetings with project managers he'd been dodging. The work felt different without the constant undercurrent of panic. Not easy. It was still complex analysis requiring focus, but possible in a way it hadn't been when every spare thought was consumed by financial calculations. At 2:47 p.m., his phone buzzed with a bank notification. A deposit from Horizon Digital Systems. Employee Support Services, $15,000. Available balance, $15,847.23. Ryan stared at the number until his vision blurred. He'd had more money than this before Sarah left, back when they'd been saving for a house neither of them would ever live in. But he'd never had money that felt like salvation. He spent his lunch break in his car, calling his landlord's management office and paying December rent plus late fees, calling the utility company and clearing his overdue balance, scheduling the car repair for Wednesday, making minimum credit card payments that would prevent default. When he finished, he still had over $11,000, a buffer against catastrophe, breathing room he hadn't experienced in months. Tuesday morning arrived faster than expected. Ryan's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., giving him time to shower, dress, and drive to the office through pre-dawn darkness. The Horizon Digital Systems building was nearly empty at 6:45. Just security staff and a few maintenance workers preparing for the day ahead. Victoria's office was on the 27th floor, accessible by elevators that required executive keycard access after hours. Jennifer had arranged temporary authorization for Ryan, sent to his phone as a digital pass that made the elevator controls light up when he held it near the sensor. The executive floor was everything the standard office spaces weren't. Real artwork instead of motivational posters, furniture that looked designed rather than bulk ordered, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Chicago's skyline. Victoria's office was at the far end, her door propped open just as she'd promised during her speech. No lock, literally accessible. Ryan knocked anyway. "Come in," Victoria's voice called. She sat behind a desk that was surprisingly modest for a CEO, functional rather than ostentatious, its surface covered with actual work instead of decorative objects. She wore a navy suit and looked like she'd been awake for hours, coffee mug half empty beside her laptop. When she saw Ryan, she gestured to the small conference table near her windows. "We'll work over here," she said. Desks create hierarchy. This is a mentorship, not a performance review. Ryan sat in one of the chairs, setting down the notebook he'd brought for taking notes. Victoria took the chair across from him, rather than at the head of the table. "First session ground rules," she began without preamble. "These meetings are confidential unless you're reporting something that requires legal intervention, harassment, safety concerns, that kind of thing. What we discuss stays between us. I'm not reporting back to your manager or HR about your personal struggles unless it's relevant to resource allocation for the program." "Okay," Ryan said. "Second, I need you to be honest. If something isn't working, if you need different support, if I'm pushing too hard or not enough, tell me. I can't help if I'm working with incomplete information." Victoria's eyes were sharp in the early morning light. "And third, I need you to understand that this program's success depends on your success. I'm invested in this, Ryan. Your outcomes reflect directly on my leadership and the viability of this approach. So when you struggle, and you will struggle, I need to know immediately so we can address it." "That's a lot of pressure," Ryan said quietly. "It is. But it's honest pressure, not hidden manipulation. I'd rather you know exactly what's at stake than pretend this is consequence-free support." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Now tell me what happened after Friday night. Jennifer said you called Saturday morning." Ryan walked her through the weekend, the application process, the Monday fund transfer, paying off immediate debts, the feeling of being able to breathe for the first time in months. Victoria listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her own tablet. "The money solves the crisis," Victoria said when he finished. "But it doesn't solve the underlying pattern. Financial stress was the symptom. What was the cause?" Ryan had been expecting this question since Saturday. He'd practiced answers, tried to find explanations that wouldn't sound like excuses or weakness. "My fiancée left 6 months ago," he said finally. "Unexpected. She took half our savings and left me with an apartment I couldn't afford alone. I had to move fast, found this studio that fit my budget, but barely. Then the expenses started piling up, car repairs I'd been putting off, Medical bills from an emergency room visit, student loans that came out of deferment. Each thing alone was manageable, but altogether, you were drowning, Victoria finished. And you didn't tell anyone. Who was I supposed to tell? HR, my manager? Hey, I know I'm paid to do this job, but I'm too busy having a breakdown to function properly? Ryan's voice came out sharper than intended. This company posts record profits. Everyone around me seems fine. I assumed the problem was me, that I wasn't managing my life well enough, wasn't resilient enough, wasn't strong enough to handle what everyone else apparently handles without issue. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Do you know why I removed the lock from my office door? She asked. The question seemed unrelated, but Ryan had learned to follow her shifts. You mentioned accessibility, open door policy. That's the public reason. The real reason is that 17 years ago, when I was where you are now, I worked for a CEO who kept his door locked. Not just closed, actively locked, with his assistant screening every interaction. He was inaccessible by design, and that design communicated that leadership was separate from the rest of us, untouchable, above the struggles that real employees faced. Victoria stood and moved to the window, looking out at Chicago's awakening skyline. I collapsed at my desk because I'd been working 70-hour weeks at my primary job and picking up weekend shifts at a restaurant to cover debts my ex-boyfriend left me with. I woke up in the hospital with my boss standing over me, and you know what he said? She turned back to face Ryan. He said, "This is why we can't promote women to senior positions. Too emotional, can't handle the pressure." Ryan's chest tightened with anger on behalf of a woman he barely knew, for an injustice that had happened nearly 2 decades ago. I went back to work 3 days later because I couldn't afford to take real recovery time. I kept the second job. I paid off the debts while hiding every sign of struggle because showing weakness had been explicitly labeled a career-ending move. Victoria returned to the table but remained standing. It took me 8 years to get to a leadership position where I had any power to change things, and I promised myself that when I did, I would never be the kind of leader who forced people to choose between survival and dignity. Is that why you watched me? Ryan asked. The performance analytics, the monitoring? I watch everyone. It's part of my job. But when I saw your pattern, the specific combination of declining performance with no apparent cause, the physical signs of chronic stress, the way you isolated rather than asking for help, I recognized it because I lived it. Victoria sat back down, her posture less CEO and more fellow survivor. And I realized that if we had systems to catch these patterns early, before people collapsed, we could change outcomes. Ryan absorbed this, understanding dawning. The whole mentorship program, it's not about charity, it's about early intervention. Exactly. The research is clear. Financial stress destroys productivity. Mental health crises cost companies millions in turnover and lost work. But most corporate support happens too late, after people are already non-functional. We step in with severance packages and outplacement services when we should have been providing support 3 months earlier. Victoria's voice carried the passion of someone who'd thought deeply about this problem. This program is my attempt to prove that investing in employees before they hit crisis is both morally right and financially sound. And I'm your proof of concept, Ryan said. You are. Which means I need you to succeed, but not by destroying yourself to meet my expectations. I need you to succeed sustainably, using the support structures we're providing so we can refine them and scale them. Victoria pulled up something on her tablet. Jennifer sent me your therapy appointment with Dr. Chen on Thursday. Good choice. She's excellent with workplace trauma, but I want to know what you're hoping to address in those sessions. The question was direct enough to make Ryan uncomfortable. I don't know. I've never done therapy as an adult. I guess processing the breakup, learning to manage stress better. Those are fine goals, but I want you to think about something deeper. Victoria's gaze was steady, unflinching. You've spent 6 months proving you can survive on nothing. You've demonstrated you can work through exhaustion, function while drowning, maintain appearances while falling apart. Those are real skills, Ryan, survival skills. But survival skills and thriving skills are different. Survival mode teaches you to ignore your needs, push through pain, sacrifice everything for short-term continuity. Thriving requires the opposite, recognizing your needs, respecting your limits, building sustainable patterns. Victoria leaned forward. The mentorship isn't just about fixing your immediate crisis. It's about teaching you how to operate from a foundation of security instead of constant emergency. That's a completely different skill set. Ryan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of truth he'd been avoiding. He'd been so focused on just getting through each day that he'd never stopped to consider what it might look like to actually be okay. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted. "I know. That's why we're here." Victoria smiled, small but genuine. First lesson: success isn't measured by how much you can endure. It's measured by how well you can build systems that make endurance unnecessary. They spent the next hour discussing practical matters: Ryan's current projects, areas where he needed support, professional development goals he'd been putting off, weekly check-in structure. Victoria's approach was simultaneously demanding and supportive. She expected excellence but provided the resources to achieve it. "Last thing before we wrap," Victoria said as 7:55 approached. "I want you to start identifying other employees who might be struggling the way you were, not to report them or get them in trouble, but because you'll recognize the signs better than anyone else. When we're ready to expand this program, I want your input on selection criteria and support structures." "You want me to help design the thing that's helping me?" Ryan asked. "I want you to help design the thing that should exist in every company. You have first-hand experience with what works and what doesn't. That perspective is invaluable." Victoria stood, signaling the meeting's end. "Okay, same time next Tuesday. Between now and then, focus on your therapy session and the projects we discussed. And Ryan, eat regular meals, sleep more than 5 hours. Take breaks. The work will still be there, but you need to maintain your foundation." Ryan gathered his notebook and stood. "Victoria, thank you for all of this. I don't know how to... You don't have to thank me yet. Thank me when the program works and we've helped 50 other people. Thank me when you're mentoring someone else through their crisis. Thank me when this becomes normal instead of exceptional." She walked him to the door. "For now, just do the work and be honest about what you need." Ryan left her office feeling something he hadn't experienced in months. Not just hope, but direction. A sense that he wasn't just surviving day to day, but actually building towards something better. The rest of Tuesday passed in a blur of productivity that felt almost foreign after months of struggle. Ryan tackled projects with focus he'd forgotten he possessed, took an actual lunch break, and left the office at 5:30 without guilt. His apartment was still small and barely furnished, but when he walked through the door that evening, it felt less like a prison and more like a foundation he could build on. Thursday's therapy session with Dr. Chen was uncomfortable in the way necessary things often are. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with a direct manner that reminded him slightly of Victoria. She asked hard questions about Sarah, about his coping mechanisms, about the months of pretending he was fine while disintegrating internally. "You've been operating in crisis mode for half a year," Dr. Chen said near the session's end. "That's not a sustainable state. Your body and mind are designed for short-term stress response, not chronic activation. Part of our work will be teaching you how to recognize when you're slipping back into that pattern and developing different responses." Victoria said something similar, Ryan mentioned, about survival skills versus thriving skills. Dr. Chen smiled. "She's not wrong. And the fact that your workplace is actively supporting this process instead of punishing you for struggling is remarkable. Most of my clients don't have that advantage." Ryan left the appointment with homework, journaling prompts, breathing exercises, a commitment to identify 3 things daily that weren't just survival tasks. It felt simultaneously silly and necessary. The second Tuesday mentorship meeting focused less on crisis management and more on growth. Victoria had reviewed Ryan's recent project work and came prepared with specific feedback. Areas where his analysis was strong, places where he could push deeper, opportunities to take on more visible assignments. "You're good at pattern recognition," Victoria said, pulling up one of his reports on her screen. "You see connections in data that others miss, but you bury those insights in the middle of dense paragraphs instead of leading with them. Executive audiences need the conclusion first, then the supporting analysis." She walked him through restructuring his reports, demonstrating how to lead with impact and follow with evidence. It was the kind of detailed coaching Ryan had never received from his direct manager, who rarely looked at his work beyond confirming it was complete. Next week, I want you to present your latest analysis to the senior leadership team, Victoria said. 15 minutes, high-level findings, recommendations. It'll be your first exposure to that audience. Ryan's stomach dropped. I'm a junior analyst. I've never presented to leadership. You're a participant in an executive mentorship program, which means you get executive opportunities, and you need experience presenting to senior audiences if you want to advance. Victoria's expression was firm, but not unkind. I'll help you prepare. We'll practice until you're comfortable. But this is part of growth, pushing into discomfort strategically. The third and fourth Tuesday meetings followed similar patterns: combination of support and challenge, acknowledgement of progress, and identification of next steps. Ryan's projects improved visibly, his confidence growing as Victoria's coaching sharpened his work. The financial stability meant he slept better, ate regularly, stopped living in constant calculation mode. Therapy with Dr. Chen was slowly untangling the knots of trauma and stress that had accumulated. But it was during the fifth Tuesday meeting, early February now, that things shifted in a way Ryan hadn't anticipated. They'd been discussing his upcoming presentation to senior leadership, scheduled for Friday afternoon, carefully rehearsed, notes refined through multiple iterations. Victoria was satisfied with his preparation, ready to move on to other topics. Before we switch gears, Ryan said, I wanted to mention something I've noticed. Victoria's attention sharpened. Go ahead. There's an analyst in product development, Emma something, I don't know her last name, but I've seen her in the break room lately, and she has the same look I had, that combination of exhaustion and panic. She's losing weight, always checking her phone, staying late every night. And yesterday I saw her eating vending machine dinner at 8 p.m. looking like she might cry. Victoria was already making notes on her tablet. Emma Torres, junior analyst, been with us 18 months. Go on. I don't know her situation, Ryan continued, but the pattern feels familiar. And you said you wanted me to flag potential candidates for when the program expands. I did. Victoria looked up from her notes. This is exactly the kind of observation I need. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Are you going to approach her? Ryan asked. Not directly, not yet. But I'll have Jennifer review her file, look at performance analytics, see if the pattern matches. Victoria's expression was thoughtful. If it does, we'll consider reaching out. Very carefully. The last thing we want is for someone to feel ambushed or singled out. When I got the offer, I thought it was a trap, Ryan admitted. It took me the whole weekend to believe it might be real. I remember. That's why expansion has to be methodical. We need to build trust, demonstrate outcomes, show this isn't corporate manipulation disguised as support. Victoria set down her tablet. Which brings me to something I've been meaning to discuss. Your presentation Friday. It's not just about your project findings. Ryan's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. What do you mean? The senior leadership team knows about the mentorship program in broad strokes. They approve the budget, they understand the concept, but they haven't seen the results yet. You're going to be their first real exposure to what this program produces. Victoria's voice was steady but serious. I need you to understand that pressure isn't about scaring you. It's about being honest. Your performance Friday will influence how they perceive this initiative. So if I mess up, if you genuinely mess up despite preparation and support, then we assess why and adjust. But Ryan, you're not going to mess up. You're ready for this. Victoria stood and moved to her window, her back to him. I wouldn't put you in front of leadership if I didn't believe that. I'm betting on you because the evidence supports that bet. Ryan joined her at the window, looking out at Chicago's morning light painting the skyline in gold and shadow. I won't let you down, he said quietly. You haven't yet. Victoria turned to face him, and something in her expression was different, less CEO, more person. You know what the hardest part of this has been for me? Not the budget negotiations or the board resistance or the program design. It's been watching you doubt yourself despite overwhelming evidence that you're capable of extraordinary work. I spent 6 months failing, Ryan said. That's hard to forget. You spent 6 months surviving impossible circumstances. There's a difference. Victoria's voice carried intensity that made Ryan's chest tight. And you've spent the last 2 months proving what you can do with proper support. That's the story that matters. They stood there for a moment, the space between them feeling somehow smaller than the physical distance. Ryan became suddenly acutely aware of Victoria as more than his CEO or mentor, as a woman who'd survived her own version of his nightmare, who'd built her success from rubble, who looked at him with understanding that went beyond professional assessment. He stepped back deliberately, breaking whatever moment had formed. "I should get to my desk," he said, his voice not quite steady. "I have work to prep before Friday." "Of course." Victoria's professional mask slid back into place smoothly, but Ryan thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or relief that he'd been the one to retreat. "Same time next Tuesday. Let me know how the presentation goes." Ryan left her office feeling unsettled in a new way. A discomfort that had nothing to do with financial stress or performance anxiety, and everything to do with the realization that somewhere between therapy sessions and mentorship meetings and midnight emails about program documentation, he'd started seeing Victoria Hale as more than his boss. That was dangerous, complicated, potentially devastating to everything the program represented. Ryan pushed the thought away as he rode the elevator down to his floor, but it lingered like smoke, impossible to fully dispel, present in every breath. Friday afternoon arrived with the weight of everything Ryan had been building toward. He'd rehearsed his presentation 17 times, twice with Victoria during their Tuesday session, 3 times alone in his apartment speaking to his bathroom mirror, 12 more times in his head during moments of downtime throughout the week. The slides were polished, the talking points memorized, the data verified and re-verified until he could recite findings in his sleep. None of that stopped his hands from shaking as he stood outside the executive conference room at 2:27 p.m., 3 minutes before his scheduled presentation time. The conference room occupied prime real estate on the 27th floor, its glass walls offering views of both Chicago's skyline and the interior office landscape. Through those walls, Ryan could see the senior leadership team assembling. Chief Financial Officer David Park, Chief Operating Officer Michelle Santos, VP of Product Development, James Whitmore, VP of Human Resources Jennifer Marsh, and at the head of the table, Victoria. 7 people who collectively made decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions of dollars, now gathering to hear a junior analyst present findings they could easily have received via email. Ryan checked his phone, 2:28 p.m. His presentation file was loaded on the laptop he carried, backup copy on a thumb drive in his pocket in case of technical failure, printed handouts in his portfolio in case of catastrophic technology collapse. Dr. Chen had taught him breathing exercises for moments like this. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. He tried it now, standing in the hallway where passing employees could see him talking to himself like someone preparing for battle. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad." Ryan turned to find Jennifer Marsh approaching with 2 bottles of water, her expression warm and knowing. "I'm presenting to the entire executive team," Ryan said. "It feels approximately the same. They're people, not predators. Well, mostly." Jennifer handed him one of the water bottles. "David can be intense. Michelle asks hard questions, but they're not looking to tear you apart. They're curious about what Victoria's been working on." "I'm the evidence," Ryan said. "If I screw this up, then you screw it up, we learn from it, and we adjust. But Ryan, you're not going to screw up. I've seen your presentation. It's solid work delivered with clarity. That's all they need." Jennifer checked her watch. "It's time. Ready?" Ryan nodded, not trusting his voice. They entered together, Jennifer holding the door as Ryan walked into a room that felt simultaneously too large and suffocatingly small. The executives looked up from various laptops and phones, attention shifting to him with the focused intensity of people whose time was measured in 6-figure hourly equivalents. Ryan recognized most of them from company communications and the holiday party, but seeing them assembled in one space was different, a concentration of power and authority that made his earlier confidence feel laughably fragile. "Everyone, this is Ryan Mercer," Victoria said from her position at the table's head. "He's been participating in the Executive Mentorship Initiative I briefed you on in January. Ryan's going to present analysis on our Q4 market positioning data, and then we'll discuss the mentorship program more broadly." Ryan moved to the presentation screen, connecting his laptop with hands that trembled slightly but functioned. The first slide appeared, clean title page. his name looking somehow official in the corporate template Victoria had provided. "Thank you for your time," Ryan began, his voice steadier than expected. "I've analyzed our Q4 market performance across 3 key segments, identifying patterns that suggest strategic opportunities for Q2 expansion." He clicked to the second slide, the executive summary Victoria had taught him to lead with. Conclusion first, evidence second, impact before detail. The core finding: we're underperforming in the mid-market segment not due to product limitations, but due to pricing perception and sales channel mismatch. Our competitors are capturing clients we should own, not because they offer better solutions, but because they've aligned their go-to-market strategy with buyer psychology in that segment. David Park leaned forward, his expression sharpening with interest. Quantify underperforming. Ryan was ready for this. Victoria had predicted David would want numbers immediately. "We're losing approximately 37% of mid-market opportunities at the proposal stage. Win rate is 63% when it should be closer to 85% based on product capability scores and client needs alignment. That gap represents roughly $18 million in annual recurring revenue we're leaving on the table." Michelle Santos made a note on her tablet. "And you're attributing this to pricing perception rather than actual pricing issues?" "Correct. Our pricing is competitive, actually favorable compared to primary competitors. But our pricing structure communicates enterprise-tier complexity. Mid-market buyers perceive it as too sophisticated for our needs, even when the underlying cost is appropriate." Ryan clicked to the next slide, showing the research methodology. "I analyzed RFP responses, post-loss client interviews, and competitive intelligence across 47 mid-market opportunities. The pattern is consistent. We're eliminated not on price or capability, but on perceived fit." James Whitmore spoke up from the far end of the table. "So, what's your recommendation?" This was the moment Victoria had drilled him on. Executives didn't just want analysis, they wanted actionable conclusions delivered with confidence even when uncertainty existed. "Three-part approach," Ryan said. "First, restructure our mid-market pricing presentation to emphasize simplicity and scalability rather than comprehensive features. Second, realign our sales channel strategy to use inside sales for mid-market, rather than field reps who bring enterprise sale complexity. Third, develop mid-market specific case studies that speak to segment priorities rather than using enterprise success stories." "Timeline and resource requirements?" Michelle asked. Ryan had prepared this too. "Pricing presentation restructure is a 2-week marketing project requiring minimal resources. Sales channel realignment is more complex, approximately 8 to 12 weeks for training and territory adjustment, but we can pilot with existing inside sales team before full rollout. Case study development is ongoing content work that fits into current marketing bandwidth. ROI projection?" David again, always focused on numbers. "Conservative estimate, 12 million incremental ARR in year 1 if we capture just 2/3 of the opportunity gap. That's assuming no improvement in enterprise or small business segments and no market expansion beyond current TAM." Ryan clicked to his final slide showing the financial model. "More aggressive scenarios reach 20 million, but I'm recommending we plan for the conservative case." The room was silent for a moment, executives processing what they'd heard. Ryan's heart hammered against his ribs, his mouth dry despite the water Jennifer had provided. He delivered everything Victoria had coached him to deliver, but he had no idea if it had landed. Victoria spoke first, her tone carefully neutral. "Questions for Ryan before we move to broader discussion?" Michelle raised her hand slightly. "Walk me through your research methodology on the post-loss interviews. How do we know clients are being honest about why they didn't choose us rather than giving us polite deflection?" Ryan had anticipated this too, though the question coming from the COO still sent adrenaline spiking through his system. "Valid concern. I triangulated 3 data sources: the official client feedback from our sales team, independent interviews conducted by our market research partner without sales involvement, and competitive win-loss analysis from industry reports. The pricing perception issue appears consistently across all 3 sources, even when clients had no reason to coordinate their responses." "And you're confident the sales channel issue isn't just a training gap with our current field reps?" James asked. "I considered that, but the data suggests structural mismatch rather than skill deficit. Field reps excel at enterprise complexity because they're trained and compensated for long-cycle consultative sales. Mid-market needs faster cycles and simpler engagement, which is where inside sales teams are optimized to perform. It's not about one approach being better. It's about matching sales strategy to buyer psychology. David looked at Victoria. This is solid work, really solid. Where has this analysis been for the last 2 quarters? The question hung in the air, its implication clear. Why were they just now hearing recommendations that should have been identified months ago? Ryan completed this analysis over the past 4 weeks as part of his mentorship project, Victoria said smoothly. The data has always been available, but it required someone with both analytical capability and dedicated time to synthesize it properly. That's part of what the mentorship program provides. Space for talented analysts to work on strategic questions rather than just reactive tasks. Jennifer spoke up, directing her comment to the broader table. Which brings us to the program discussion. Ryan's presentation demonstrates the kind of outcomes we're seeing from the Executive Mentorship Initiative. His performance has improved dramatically over the past 2 months, not because his fundamental skills changed, but because we provided support structures that allowed those skills to flourish. Tell us about the program experience, Michelle said, addressing Ryan directly. What's been most valuable? Ryan set down his presentation remote, shifting from analyst mode to something more personal and vulnerable. Honestly, the financial assistance that kept me from becoming homeless was pretty valuable. The room went very quiet. Ryan pushed forward, committed now to honesty Victoria had demanded from the beginning. I was in crisis when Victoria identified me for this program. Personal circumstances had put me in a position where I was choosing between rent and groceries, where every day was triage rather than actual work. The emergency support resolved immediate problems, but the mentorship is what's changing long-term trajectory. How so? James asked, his tone curious rather than challenging. Victoria teaches me how to think strategically instead of just executing tasks. She shows me how executives process information, what they need to make decisions, how to communicate impact instead of just activity. That's not something I'd learned from my direct manager, who's focused on project delivery rather than development. Ryan glanced at Victoria, who nodded slightly, permission to continue. But more than that, the program gives me psychological safety to take risks. I can work on ambitious analysis like this presentation because I'm not operating from constant fear of failure. When you're drowning, you can't innovate. You can only survive. David leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. What's the total program cost per participant? Jennifer fielded this one. Emergency financial assistance averages $12,000 to $15,000, depending on circumstances. Salary adjustment brings participants to market rate compensation, which varies by role. Therapy and professional development add approximately $8,000 annually. Executive mentorship time is harder to quantify, but Victoria dedicates roughly 2 hours per week per participant, including preparation and follow-up. So we're looking at significant per-person investment, David said. What's the retention calculus? If we spend $50,000 getting someone stabilized and they leave for a competitor, that's a net loss. True, Victoria replied, but compare that to replacement costs. Recruiting, onboarding, and ramping a new analyst costs approximately $90,000 when you factor in lost productivity and training time. We're betting that investing in retention is more cost-effective than constant replacement. Plus, participants sign 2-year retention agreements as part of program enrollment. And if someone's struggling due to genuine performance issues rather than circumstantial crisis, Michelle asked, how do we distinguish between someone who needs support and someone who's simply not capable of the role? That's the art of it, Victoria admitted. We're using performance history as the primary filter. Ryan's track record before his personal crisis was exemplary, which suggested his decline was circumstantial rather than fundamental. For program expansion, we're developing algorithms to identify similar patterns. Strong historical performance followed by recent decline correlated with potential life stressors. James shifted forward. I'm concerned about fairness. If we're providing this level of support to some employees but not others, how do we avoid claims of favoritism or discrimination? By being transparent about selection criteria and making the program available to anyone who meets them, Jennifer said. We're not hand-picking favorites. We're systematically identifying people who are struggling despite capability and offering structured support. The criteria are objective: performance history, current decline indicators, assessment of circumstantial factors. Any employee who fits the profile is eligible. What about Emma Torres? Michelle asked, looking at Victoria. Jennifer flagged her file last week. Similar pattern to Ryan's. Are we moving forward with outreach? Ryan's attention sharpened. The analyst he'd mentioned to Victoria, they were already acting on it. We're still assessing, Victoria said, and Emma's situation has some differences from Ryan's that require careful consideration. But yes, she's a strong candidate for program expansion if circumstances warrant intervention. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, the executives drilling into program mechanics, cost structures, risk mitigation strategies, scaling considerations. Ryan answered questions when asked but mostly observed, watching Victoria navigate challenges with the same strategic thinking she'd been teaching him. She acknowledged concerns without becoming defensive, provided data without overwhelming the discussion, and consistently reframed the conversation around outcomes rather than costs. Finally, Michelle checked her watch and made the decision that signaled ending. I think we've covered the key questions. Ryan, thank you for the presentation. Really excellent work. The mid-market analysis deserves immediate attention. Victoria, let's continue developing the mentorship program. I want to see a pilot expansion to 3 additional participants by end of Q2, with clear metrics for success evaluation. Agreed, David said. But I want monthly reporting on program costs and outcomes. If the numbers don't support the investment, we need to be willing to adjust or discontinue. Understood, Victoria replied. Jennifer will provide detailed reporting starting next month. The meeting dispersed, executives gathering laptops and phones, already moving mentally to their next obligations. Ryan stood by the presentation screen feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated, adrenaline still coursing through his system with nowhere productive to go. Jennifer approached first, smiling warmly. That was impressive, Ryan. You handled their questions with real confidence. I was terrified, Ryan admitted. Terror and confidence aren't mutually exclusive. The best presenters are usually the ones who care enough to be nervous. She squeezed his shoulder briefly. I'll be in touch about next steps on Emma's assessment. Your observation was timely. Victoria remained at the head of the table, reviewing something on her tablet, waiting until the room cleared. When the door finally closed behind James Whitmore, leaving just the two of them, she looked up. You know that was exceptional, right? She said. Ryan exhaled, tension releasing from his shoulders. I thought David was going to tear the methodology apart. David tears everything apart. It's his job. But he was impressed. I could tell by how many questions he asked. If he thought the analysis was weak, he'd have dismissed it in 3 minutes. Victoria stood and moved around the table toward him. The way you handled Michelle's question about research validity was particularly strong. You didn't get defensive. You acknowledged the concern and provided evidence. That's executive-level communication. You taught me that, Ryan said. I provided coaching. You did the learning. Victoria stopped a few feet away, close enough that Ryan could see the satisfaction in her expression, but far enough to maintain professional distance. This is what I meant about proving the program works. You just demonstrated to our entire leadership team what's possible when we invest in people properly. What happens now? Ryan asked. With the mid-market recommendations? Michelle will assign someone to own implementation, probably someone in product or sales. You'll likely be asked to consult on the project, provide additional analysis as needed. It's not your job to execute the strategy, but you've established yourself as the subject matter expert. Victoria's smile was genuine. Which means you've just increased your visibility across the executive team considerably. That's career currency, Ryan. The implications of that settled over him. 2 months ago, he'd been a struggling junior analyst invisible to leadership. Now he'd presented strategic analysis to the C-suite and been asked to support implementation. The trajectory was dizzying. I couldn't have done this without the program, Ryan said quietly. Without you. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a crack in the professional facade that let something more personal show through. You had the capability all along. I just helped you access it. They stood in the empty conference room, afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. the moment stretching longer than professional interaction should allow. Ryan became acutely aware of details he'd been trying to ignore. The way Victoria's eyes reflected light, the slight loosening of her posture now that they were alone, the fact that she hadn't stepped back to reestablish distance. "Victoria," Ryan started, not knowing how to finish the sentence. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the moment. Ryan pulled it out reflexively and saw a text from Marcus in accounting. "Dude, I just heard you presented to the executive team. How did that even happen?" "I should let you get back to your afternoon," Victoria said, her professional mask sliding smoothly back into place. "Same time Tuesday for our regular session?" "Yes," Ryan managed. "Tuesday at 7. He gathered his laptop and portfolio, moving toward the door on legs that felt unsteady for reasons that had nothing to do with presentation nerves. Victoria remained by the conference table, watching him leave with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Ryan made it back to his desk before the full weight of what had just happened, both the presentation and the moment after, crashed over him. He'd succeeded in front of leadership. He'd proven the program's value. He'd demonstrated capability that could change his career trajectory. And he'd stood in an empty conference room with Victoria Hale feeling something that went well beyond professional gratitude or mentorship dynamics. That night, Ryan's therapy session with Dr. Chen took an unexpected turn. "You seem different today," she observed 15 minutes into their weekly appointment. "More energized. What's changed?" Ryan told her about the presentation, about the executive team's response, about Michelle's commitment to program expansion. Dr. Chen listened with the focused attention she brought to all their sessions, occasionally making notes, but mostly just observing. "That's significant progress," she said when he finished. 2 months ago, you were in survival mode. Now you're delivering strategic analysis to C-suite executives. How does that feel?" "Surreal," Ryan admitted. "Like I'm watching someone else's life instead of living my own." That dissociation is common after prolonged stress. Your nervous system is still calibrated for crisis, even though circumstances have changed. Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "But I'm noticing something in how you talk about Victoria. The way you describe your interactions has shifted over the past few weeks." Ryan's chest tightened. "She's my mentor. She's been incredibly supportive." "She has, and I'm not suggesting there's anything inappropriate happening, but I want you to be aware of potential transference dynamics." Dr. Chen's tone was gentle but direct. "Victoria saved you from crisis. She's provided support and guidance at a vulnerable moment in your life. It's psychologically normal to develop strong feelings towards someone who fills that role, especially when they're also in a position of power and authority." "I'm not," Ryan started, then stopped. Lying to his therapist seemed counterproductive. "I'm aware of it. The feelings. I'm managing them." "How?" "By not acting on them, by maintaining professional boundaries, by recognizing that what I'm feeling is probably gratitude and circumstance rather than something real." Ryan's voice came out more defensive than intended. "Those are good strategies," Dr. Chen said, "but I want you to dig deeper into what you're actually feeling. Because if this is transference, gratitude mixed with vulnerability and power dynamics, you need to acknowledge that so it doesn't complicate the mentorship. But if it's something else, something that would exist regardless of circumstances, that's a different situation requiring different navigation." "What difference does it make?" Ryan asked. "Either way, she's my CEO. Either way, acting on it would be catastrophic for the program, for my career, for everything we've built. I'm not suggesting you act on anything. I'm suggesting you be honest with yourself about what you're feeling so you can make informed decisions about how to proceed." Dr. Chen's expression was compassionate but firm. Emotions don't go away just because we decide they're inconvenient. They either get acknowledged and managed, or they get suppressed and cause problems later. Ryan spent the rest of the session unpacking what he'd been carefully not examining: the way his heart rate increased during Tuesday morning meetings, the way he found excuses to email Victoria about program questions that could probably wait, the way he'd started noticing details that had nothing to do with professional interaction, how she took her coffee, the small scar on her left hand, the precise shade of her eyes in morning light. "It's more than transference," Ryan finally admitted. "I know it is because it feels different than gratitude or admiration. It feels like how I felt about Sarah in the beginning, except somehow more intense because Victoria actually sees me, really sees me, in a way Sarah never did. And what are you going to do with that information? Dr. Chen asked. Nothing, Ryan said. Ryan bowed. Absolutely nothing. Because doing anything would be selfish and destructive, and Victoria has invested too much in me for me to repay that by creating an impossible situation. That's a reasonable conclusion. But Ryan, be prepared for the possibility that she might be feeling something too. Power dynamics complicate things, but they don't eliminate human emotion. If Victoria is also navigating unexpected feelings, you may need to address that together to maintain the professional relationship. Ryan left therapy feeling more unsettled than he'd arrived, Dr. Chen's words echoing through his mind as he drove home through Friday evening traffic. The idea that Victoria might feel something too seemed simultaneously impossible and terrifying. She was his CEO, a woman who'd achieved the kind of success Ryan could barely imagine, someone who could have anyone she wanted without needing to look at a struggling analyst she'd pulled from crisis. But then he remembered the moment in the conference room after the presentation, the way she'd looked at him, the way neither of them had stepped back to reestablish proper distance until his phone had interrupted. Ryan spent Saturday morning working on the mid-market analysis expansion that Michelle had requested, losing himself in data that made sense when nothing else did. By afternoon, he'd drafted an implementation timeline with resource requirements and risk factors, comprehensive enough to be useful without overstepping into territory that belonged to whoever would own execution. He sent it to Victoria at 3:47 p.m. with a brief note. Follow-up analysis as requested. Let me know if leadership needs additional detail. Her response came 13 minutes later. This is excellent. Exactly what Michelle will need. You're already thinking like a strategist rather than just an analyst. And then after a pause long enough that Ryan had set his phone down and started making dinner. How did therapy go yesterday? The question was personal, but not inappropriately so. Victoria knew his therapy schedule. It was part of the program structure. But asking about the session itself felt like crossing some invisible line into territory that wasn't strictly professional. Ryan typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, productive, lots to process. That's good. Processing is part of progress. Another pause, longer this time. Ryan watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice before the next message arrived. I'm glad you're taking the therapy seriously. A lot of people in your position would see it as an obligation to check off rather than genuine support. You told me to be honest about what I need, Ryan wrote back. Therapy is what I need. I know. I'm just acknowledging that honesty is harder than it sounds. Ryan stared at his phone, trying to parse meaning from subtext. Was Victoria just being supportive? Or was there something more in the conversation, some acknowledgement of complexity that went beyond mentor and mentee? His phone buzzed again. Enjoy your weekend. See you Tuesday morning. You too, Ryan replied, and that was the end of it. Except it wasn't, because Ryan spent the rest of Saturday and most of Sunday thinking about those messages, about Dr. Chen's warnings, about the expression on Victoria's face in the empty conference room. He thought about it during his weekly call with his mom, who he'd finally told about the mentorship program, leaving out the part about nearly being evicted, and during his grocery shopping trip to stock the refrigerator that was no longer terrifyingly empty, and during the Sunday evening hours when he usually felt the creeping dread of Monday approaching. The dread didn't come this week. Instead, Ryan felt something closer to anticipation, which was its own kind of dangerous. Tuesday morning arrived cold and clear, Chicago's winter sun casting long shadows across the city as Ryan drove to the office at 6:30 a.m. The building was nearly empty at this hour, security nodding him through with the familiarity of someone who'd made this trip every week for 2 months now. The executive floor was silent except for the hum of HVAC systems and the distant sound of cleaning staff finishing overnight work. Victoria's office door was open, light spilling into the hallway. Ryan knocked softly and entered to find her already at the conference table, coffee mug in hand, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly rent used to cost when he couldn't afford it. Morning, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Coffee's fresh if you want some. Real coffee, not that instant sadness you keep in your desk drawer. Ryan smiled despite himself and poured a cup from the carafe on the side table. The coffee was excellent, dark roast, properly brewed, the kind of quality that came from caring about details. Michelle sent your implementation timeline to David and James last night, Victoria said as Ryan settled into his chair. They're both impressed. James wants you to consult on the sales channel realignment directly with his team. That's good, right? Ryan asked. That's very good. It means you're becoming a known quantity to executive leadership, which opens doors that usually take years to access. Victoria made a note on her tablet. But it also means increased visibility, which comes with increased scrutiny. You need to be prepared for that. They spent the next hour discussing the mid-market project implications. Victoria coaching Ryan on how to navigate cross-functional collaboration with senior teams, how to manage expectations when consulting rather than owning execution, how to protect his time while still being responsive to requests. It was the kind of strategic career guidance that Ryan had never received before this program, the kind of knowledge that usually stayed locked in executive circles and private networks. Last thing before we wrap, Victoria said as their session approached its end. Jennifer wants to move forward with Emma Torres' outreach. We've reviewed her file, confirmed the performance pattern, matches program criteria. I'll be approaching her this week with a preliminary conversation. That's great, Ryan said. She needs it. I can see it in her face, the same exhaustion I had. I know, which is why I'm being very careful about how I frame the offer. The last thing I want is for her to feel singled out or ambushed. Victoria set down her tablet and looked at Ryan directly. I'm going to tell her that you're a current participant and that you flagged her as potentially benefiting from the program. I need your permission to use your name that way. Of course, Ryan said immediately. If it helps her say yes, absolutely use my name. Thank you. Victoria's expression softened slightly. You've become part of the program's legitimacy, Ryan. Your success makes it easier for others to trust the offer. They sat in silence for a moment, morning light streaming through the windows behind Victoria, creating a halo effect that made her seem somehow both more human and more distant. Can I ask you something? Ryan said, the question forming before he'd fully thought it through. Always. When you made the decision to approach me at the holiday party, to take the risk of locking us both in a bathroom and making this offer, what made you certain it would work, that I wouldn't just take the money and fail anyway? Victoria considered the question seriously, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. I wasn't certain. I couldn't be. But I'd rather fail trying to help someone than succeed by ignoring that they're struggling. And honestly, Ryan, I saw something in you that reminded me of myself 17 years ago. Not just the crisis, but the determination underneath it. The refusal to completely break even when every circumstance was pushing you toward collapse. I was breaking, Ryan said quietly. I was barely holding together. But you were still holding, still showing up, still trying. Victoria's voice carried conviction that made Ryan's chest tight. That's not weakness. That's the foundation everything else is built on. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was acknowledging. Ryan knew he should stand up, gather his things, end the meeting, and return to his desk. Instead, he stayed seated, holding Victoria's gaze, aware that they were approaching some invisible boundary that would be difficult to cross back over. Victoria, Ryan started. I know, she said, cutting him off gently. I know, Ryan, but we can't. The acknowledgement hung in the air between them, confirmation that he wasn't imagining the tension, that whatever he was feeling wasn't one-sided, that they were both navigating something complicated and dangerous that had nothing to do with professional mentorship. I'm not going to do anything that jeopardizes the program, Ryan said, or your position, or what we've built. I know that too. Victoria stood, deliberately breaking the moment. Same time next Tuesday. And Ryan, thank you for being honest, even about things we can't act on. Ryan left her office feeling like he'd crossed some threshold he couldn't quite define, something that shifted the foundation of their relationship without changing its visible structure. They would continue meeting Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m. They would continue the mentorship that was transforming his career. They would continue building the program that might help dozens of struggling employees. But underneath all of that, acknowledged now in a way it hadn't been before, something else existed, something neither of them knew what to do with, something that felt both inevitable and impossible, something that would require careful navigation if they wanted to protect everything they'd worked to create. Ryan returned to his desk and threw himself into work with the focused intensity of someone trying to not think about complications. But throughout the day, as he collaborated with James's team on sales channel analysis and responded to Michelle's questions about implementation risks, a single thought kept circling through his mind like a prayer or a warning. I know, Ryan, but we can't. The problem was that knowing something was impossible didn't stop it from being true. The weeks that followed their unspoken acknowledgement settled into a pattern that was simultaneously sustainable and excruciating. Ryan and Victoria maintained their Tuesday morning meetings with professional precision, discussing project progress and career development and program expansion as though nothing had shifted beneath the surface. They were careful now in ways they hadn't been before, maintaining physical distance, avoiding eye contact that lasted too long, ending conversations before silence could become meaningful. It was working in the sense that nothing catastrophic happened. It was failing in the sense that Ryan thought about her constantly. He threw himself into the mid-market implementation project, working directly with James Whitmore's sales team to restructure their approach to segment targeting. The work was engaging enough to occupy his conscious mind during business hours, complex enough to require genuine focus, visible enough that senior leadership continued noticing his contributions. Michelle Santos pulled him into a Q2 strategy session. David Park asked for his input on pricing model revisions. Jennifer Marsh copied him on program expansion communications, treating him as a stakeholder rather than just a participant. Ryan's career was transforming in real time. The trajectory he'd thought was permanently derailed now accelerating beyond what he'd imagined possible 6 months ago. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he spent Thursday therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, dissecting why success felt hollow when the person who'd made it possible was someone he couldn't have. You're conflating two separate things, Dr. Chen said during their late March session, after Ryan had spent 20 minutes explaining his latest project win and why it didn't feel satisfying. Your professional success and your feelings for Victoria. They're related, but not dependent. The work you're doing would be excellent regardless of who was mentoring you. But she's the one who taught me how to do it, Ryan argued. How to think strategically, how to communicate with executives, how to translate analysis into action. Without her coaching, you'd have learned those skills differently, maybe more slowly, but you'd have learned them because you have the underlying capability. Dr. Chen's expression was gentle but firm. Ryan, you need to claim ownership of your own success. Yes, Victoria provided crucial support at a critical moment, but you're the one doing the work. You're the one showing up, learning, growing, delivering results. That's your achievement, not hers. It doesn't feel like mine, Ryan admitted, because you're still operating from a scarcity mindset. You spent so long in survival mode that your nervous system is still calibrated for crisis, still waiting for everything to collapse. Success feels temporary because you haven't internalized that your circumstances have genuinely changed. Dr. Chen leaned forward. And I think you're also afraid that if you claim your success as your own, you'll lose the connection to Victoria that made it possible. As long as you attribute everything to her, you have a reason to stay close. The observation landed like a physical blow, true in a way Ryan hadn't wanted to examine. So what am I supposed to do? He asked. Just stop feeling what I'm feeling? No. Feel what you're feeling, but separate it from your professional identity and success. They're not the same thing. You can have complicated emotions about Victoria while also recognizing that your career growth is yours to own. She paused. And you need to consider what you're actually hoping for here. Because if nothing can happen between you, which you both seem to agree on, then you need to find a way to be okay with that reality instead of existing in perpetual longing. Ryan left that session feeling simultaneously enlightened and frustrated, carrying Dr. Chen's words like uncomfortable cargo through the rest of his week. She was right. He knew she was right. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were entirely different experiences. The following Tuesday meeting brought unexpected news. Victoria had successfully recruited Emma Torres into the mentorship program, and the response from Emma had been even more dramatic than Ryan's own transformation. Within 3 weeks of receiving emergency financial support and beginning weekly mentoring, Emma's performance had rebounded sharply. Her project quality improved, her visible stress decreased, and she'd started volunteering for assignments she'd previously avoided. "She's a natural fit for product strategy," Victoria said, pulling up Emma's recent work on her tablet. "I think we've been underutilizing her because her manager sees her as purely execution-focused. But give her strategic questions and proper support, and she's exceptional." "That's great," Ryan said, and meant it. Watching the program help someone else felt validating in a way he hadn't anticipated. Proof that what Victoria had built wasn't just lucky intervention, but systematic support that could scale. "Which brings me to the next phase," Victoria continued. "Michelle wants to expand to 5 more participants by end of Q2. We need to develop selection criteria that can be applied consistently across departments. I want your help designing that framework." "Mine?" Ryan asked. "Shouldn't that be Jennifer's domain?" "Jennifer handles HR mechanics, but you and Emma are the ones who've lived this experience. You know what signs to look for, what support actually matters, versus what sounds good in theory. I want to build this with input from people who needed it, not just people who studied it." Victoria's expression was earnest. "Will you work on this with me? And with Emma, I'd like to bring her into the design process too." Ryan agreed, and over the next 3 weeks found himself collaborating with both Victoria and Emma on framework development. They met in Victoria's office, early mornings to avoid attention, mapping patterns from their own experiences onto criteria that could identify others facing similar struggles. Emma brought perspectives Ryan hadn't considered, patterns specific to working parents and women navigating workplace dynamics that created different stress vectors than what Ryan had experienced. Working with Emma also provided unexpected cover for the amount of time Ryan spent with Victoria. What had previously been one-on-one mentorship meetings became 3-person collaborative sessions, professional enough that no one would question them, focused enough that personal feelings had to stay suppressed beneath program urgency. It helped. Mostly. Except for the moments when Victoria would lean across the conference table to examine something on Ryan's laptop, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive, or when their hands would accidentally touch reaching for the same document, or when she'd smile at something Emma said and Ryan would forget whatever thought he'd been forming. By mid-April, they'd developed a comprehensive selection framework, performance analytics that identified decline patterns, confidential surveys about financial stress and well-being, manager nominations for employees showing signs of struggle despite capability, and self-referral options for people brave enough to ask for help. The framework included safeguards against bias and mechanisms for ensuring diverse candidate pools across departments and demographics. "This is remarkable work," Jennifer said when they presented it to her in late April. "Seriously, this could become a model for other companies. Have you considered publishing the framework?" "Eventually," Victoria replied. "But I want at least a year of implementation data first. Proof that it works consistently, not just anecdotally." The program expansion launched the first week of May. 5 new participants selected through the framework: a software developer drowning in medical debt, a marketing analyst supporting elderly parents, a project manager recovering from divorce, an operations specialist whose partner had lost their job, and a customer service lead dealing with housing instability. Each one received customized support: emergency financial assistance tailored to their specific crisis, salary adjustments to market rate, therapy coverage, and executive mentorship matched to their career trajectory. Ryan and Emma were asked to serve as peer mentors, providing support from the perspective of people who'd already walked this path. Ryan found himself meeting with the marketing analyst, David Chen, 31, struggling with the financial burden of his mother's cancer treatment, every other week, offering practical advice about managing stress while trying to perform, about accepting help without shame, about believing that circumstances could actually improve. "You make it look easy," David said during their 3rd meeting, held over coffee at a shop near the office. "Like you've got everything together. I can't imagine feeling that stable." Ryan nearly laughed. 4 months ago, I was eating vending machine dinners and checking my bank account every hour, terrified of what I'd find. I couldn't afford groceries. My landlord was sending eviction warnings. I was convinced I'd be homeless by Christmas. The stability you're seeing is recent, fragile, and built entirely on support I almost didn't accept because I thought it was too good to be true. Why'd you finally say yes? David asked. Ryan thought about Victoria standing in that bathroom, about her confession of her own collapse, about the folder of documents that had felt like either salvation or trap. Because someone I respected told me I was worth investing in, and I decided to believe her. Even though everything in my experience suggested otherwise, even though it felt impossible, I chose to believe that maybe this one time things could actually work out. Ryan met David's eyes across the coffee shop table. It's still scary sometimes. I still have moments where I'm waiting for everything to collapse again, but the difference is now I have systems in place to catch me if I fall, instead of just free-falling until I hit bottom. David absorbed this quietly. The CEO, Victoria, she really does this for all of us? Meets with everyone weekly, reads our work, gives real feedback? She does. I don't know how she makes the time, but she does. And it's not token mentorship. It's genuine investment in your development. Ryan paused. The program only works if you engage with it honestly. If you show up to meetings, do the work, ask for what you need. Victoria can provide resources and guidance, but she can't make you use them. I'm trying, David said. It's just hard to accept that I deserve this much help. I know, I still struggle with that too. But we're not receiving charity, we're receiving investment. There's a difference. The company benefits when we succeed. Victoria's betting that supporting us properly is more cost-effective than replacing us when we burn out. So far, the data supports her. These conversations with David and the other new participants gave Ryan perspective on his own journey. 4 months ago, he'd been the one sitting across from someone more stable, barely able to believe that stability was possible. Now he was the stable one, the evidence that the program worked, the proof that circumstances could transform with proper support. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt complicated. Because the person responsible for that transformation was someone Ryan thought about every morning when he woke up and every night before he fell asleep. Someone he saw every Tuesday at 7 a.m. and sometimes in the hallways or elevators. Someone who looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, but felt like recognition of something neither of them was supposed to acknowledge. The situation came to a head in mid-May during a routine Tuesday morning session. Ryan and Victoria were reviewing Q2 performance metrics. His numbers were exceptional across every measure, validating the program's effectiveness, when Victoria set down her tablet and looked at him with unusual intensity. "We need to talk about something," she said. Ryan's stomach dropped. "Okay." Jennifer has been tracking office dynamics as part of program assessment, standard HR stuff, making sure participants aren't experiencing negative treatment, monitoring for signs of favoritism accusations, ensuring the support structure isn't creating unintended workplace consequences. Victoria's voice was carefully neutral. "She's noticed that you and I spend more time together than my mentorship with Emma or the other participants requires. Early arrivals, extended meetings, email exchanges outside business hours. Nothing inappropriate in content, but the frequency and timing create optics that could become problematic." "I'm not trying to monopolize your time," Ryan said quickly. "If I need to scale back, it's not about monopolizing time. It's about perception." Victoria's expression was troubled. "Ryan, you and I both know there's nothing happening between us that violates professional boundaries. But we also both know that's not the whole truth. And Jennifer is smart enough to recognize when two people are carefully not acknowledging something." Ryan's throat went dry. "Did she say something specific?" "She asked me if our professional relationship had developed complications that might affect the program's integrity. I told her no, which is technically accurate. We haven't crossed any lines. We maintain appropriate boundaries. Everything we do together is work-related." Victoria paused. "But I also know that technically appropriate and genuinely uncomplicated aren't the same thing." "What are you saying?" Ryan asked, though he feared he already knew. "I'm saying we need to decide what we're doing here, because this," Victoria gestured between them, "this careful dance we've been doing where we pretend nothing exists beneath the professional relationship while both knowing something does. It's not sustainable. Eventually, someone will notice what Jennifer's already noticing. And when that happens, it won't matter that we haven't done anything wrong. The appearance of impropriety is enough to undermine everything we've built." Ryan felt something crack open in his chest, a pressure he'd been containing for months finally demanding release. So what are our options? I end the mentorship? We stop seeing each other entirely? That's one option. You've progressed enough that you could transition to a different mentor without harming your development. Victoria's voice was steady, but Ryan heard the pain underneath. It would be the cleanest solution. No ambiguity, no risk, no complications. But it would also be a waste of what we've built. The work we do together is genuinely valuable, not just for you, but for program development. Your insights shape how we support others. And honestly, Ryan, you're my best success story. The participant who proves this whole initiative works. Losing that direct collaboration would impact program credibility. They sat in silence for a long moment, the early morning light casting long shadows across Victoria's office, the city beyond the windows beginning its daily awakening. There's a third option, Ryan said quietly. We acknowledge what this actually is and figure out how to navigate it honestly instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Victoria's eyes met his, sharp and searching. That's the riskiest option, and potentially the most damaging if we get it wrong, but maybe the only honest one. Ryan's heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his system. Victoria, I can't keep doing this, pretending I don't feel what I feel while spending hours with you every week building something that matters. It's making me crazy, and I think it's making you crazy too. It is, Victoria admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I haven't slept properly in weeks because I'm constantly second-guessing every interaction, every decision, every email I send you, trying to figure out where professional mentorship ends and personal feeling begins, trying to maintain boundaries while also being genuine, trying to do right by you and by the program and by my own integrity all at the same time. So what do we do? Ryan asked. Victoria stood and moved to the window, her back to him, shoulders tense beneath her suit jacket. I don't know, but I know we can't make any decisions in this moment, in this office, when we're both emotionally activated and the consequences are enormous. She turned to face him. I'm going to ask Jennifer to do a formal assessment of our working relationship. Completely confidential, but thorough. She'll evaluate whether there's any genuine conflict of interest or appearance thereof, whether the mentorship should continue, whether we need different structures to protect program integrity. You're asking HR to decide what happens between us? Ryan's voice came out sharper than intended. I'm asking HR to provide objective analysis when we're too close to the situation to see clearly. Victoria's tone was firm. Ryan, I care about you. More than I should, more than is probably wise. But I also care about the program, about the other participants who are depending on this initiative, about my own credibility and career. I can't let personal feelings, mine or yours, destroy something that could help dozens of people. So you're choosing the program over... Ryan couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate what the alternative even was. I'm choosing to get objective guidance before we do something irreversible. Victoria returned to the conference table but didn't sit. Give me 1 week. Jennifer will do her assessment, we'll review the findings together, and then we'll make decisions based on actual data rather than emotion. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we continue as we have been. Professional, appropriate, careful. 1 more week, Ryan. Can you give me that? Ryan wanted to argue, wanted to push back against the delay, wanted to force the conversation to a conclusion right now. But he also recognized the wisdom in what Victoria was asking, the need for objective analysis when personal stakes were high, the responsibility to protect something bigger than just their individual feelings. 1 week, he agreed. That week was the longest of Ryan's life. He continued his work on the mid-market implementation, met with David Chen for the regular peer mentorship session, attended a strategy meeting with Michelle Santos, where he presented Q2 performance analysis. He did all of it competently, professionally, while internally feeling like he was vibrating at a frequency slightly wrong for normal human interaction. Dr. Chen noticed immediately during their Thursday session. Something's changed, she observed. You're more agitated than usual. What happened? Ryan told her about the conversation with Victoria, about Jennifer's assessment, about the week of waiting while someone else evaluated whether they could continue working together in any capacity. How do you feel about Victoria asking HR to weigh in? Dr. Chen asked. Part of me thinks it's the right call. Objective perspective, protection for everyone involved. Part of me is terrified they'll say we can't work together anymore and that'll be the end of it. Ryan's hands clenched on his knees. And part of me is angry that we even have to do this. That two adults can't just acknowledge they have feelings for each other and figure out how to handle that responsibly without institutional intervention. That anger is valid, Dr. Chen said, but it's also important to recognize the complexity of your situation. Victoria isn't just someone you have feelings for. She's your CEO, your mentor, the person who provided critical support when you were in crisis. The power dynamics aren't simple, and they exist whether you want them to or not. So what? We just accept that nothing can ever happen? That's the answer? I don't know what the answer is. But I do know that any relationship between you two would need to navigate some serious complications. Power imbalance, professional consequences, program integrity, public perception. Those aren't insurmountable obstacles, but they're also not nothing. Dr. Chen leaned forward. The question you need to ask yourself is, if Jennifer's assessment says continuing the mentorship creates too much risk, what do you want? Do you want to fight to maintain the professional relationship, or do you want space to explore what might exist beyond it? Ryan didn't have an answer. He left therapy more confused than when he'd arrived, carrying Dr. Chen's question like a weight he couldn't put down. The assessment results came on Friday afternoon. Jennifer called Ryan into her office at 4 p.m., Victoria already seated at the small conference table with printed reports in front of her. Jennifer's expression was professionally neutral, revealing nothing about what the documents contained. "Thank you for coming, Ryan," Jennifer said as he sat down. "I've completed the assessment Victoria requested regarding your mentorship relationship. I want to be clear up front. Neither of you has violated any policy. Your behavior has been consistently professional, but Victoria was right to ask for this evaluation because there are some dynamics that need to be addressed." Ryan's heart pounded so hard he wondered if they could hear it. Jennifer continued, "Based on my observations, email analysis, and discussions with both of you, it's clear that your professional relationship has developed emotional complexity that goes beyond standard mentorship. That's not inherently problematic. Mentorship relationships often involve personal connection and mutual respect. But in this case, the intensity of connection combined with significant power differential and program visibility creates risk." "What kind of risk?" Victoria asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Perception risk primarily. If your relationship were to develop beyond professional boundaries, it could undermine program credibility. Participants might question whether Ryan's success is due to program support or personal favoritism. Leadership might view the initiative as a mechanism for inappropriate relationships rather than legitimate employee development." Jennifer's gaze moved between them. "But I'm also seeing potential risk to both of you personally. Victoria, you've invested significant emotional energy in Ryan's success, more than with other participants. Ryan, your feelings for Victoria are affecting your judgment about what's best for your career versus what feels immediately compelling." "So your recommendation is that we end the mentorship?" Ryan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Actually, no." Jennifer surprised them both. "My recommendation is that we formalize different structures around it. First, Ryan should transition to a co-mentorship model where he has a second executive mentor in addition to Victoria. That provides backup support and reduces perception that his development is dependent on one relationship. Second, we implement clearer boundaries around communication, scheduled meetings only, no personal phone numbers, all emails copied to me for program documentation. Third, we require quarterly relationship check-ins where we assess whether the mentorship is still serving its intended purpose." She pushed documents across the table to both of them. "These structures aren't punitive, they're protective. They allow you to continue working together while creating institutional safeguards that protect program integrity and both your reputations." Jennifer's expression softened slightly. "But I'm also recommending something else, and this part is more personal guidance than official HR directive." "What?" Victoria asked. "If there are personal feelings between you, and I'm not asking you to confirm or deny, but if there are, those feelings need to be addressed separately from professional relationship. You can't navigate them while also navigating mentorship and program development and all the other professional entanglements. At some point, you need to decide, Are you colleagues navigating complicated professional dynamics, or are you two people with personal feelings trying to figure out if something beyond work is possible? Because trying to be both simultaneously is what's creating the unsustainable tension. The office went silent. Ryan could hear the clock on Jennifer's wall ticking, could hear distant voices from the hallway, could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "The structures you're proposing," Victoria said finally. "If we implement those, would it be appropriate for Ryan and me to also have a conversation about the personal component? Separate from work, outside office hours, with clear understanding that it's distinct from professional relationship." Jennifer considered this carefully. Appropriate? That's complicated. Advisable? Also complicated. But if you're asking whether such a conversation would violate policy, the answer is no. As long as you're both clear about boundaries, as long as there's no quid pro quo or coercion, as long as any relationship that develops is disclosed properly and managed through appropriate channels. She looked at Ryan. "But Ryan, you need to understand something crucial. Right now, Victoria holds significant power over your career. Even with the best intentions, that power differential affects consent and choice in ways that aren't always obvious. Any personal relationship would need to navigate that reality carefully." "I understand," Ryan said, though he wasn't sure he fully did. "Then my recommendation is this. Implement the professional structures immediately. Ryan gets a second mentor. I'm thinking Michelle Santos, since she's already familiar with his work and has no reporting relationship to Victoria. Communications get formalized through proper channels. We document everything related to program participation." Jennifer paused. "And then, separately, outside these offices and these roles, you two figure out what you're actually dealing with. Have that conversation. Be honest with each other. But don't let whatever you discover bleed back into professional relationship without proper disclosure and management." Victoria and Ryan exchanged glances across the table, a wordless communication that held months of unspoken tension and recognition. "Okay," Victoria said, "we'll implement your recommendations." "All of them?" Jennifer asked, her tone making clear she meant the personal conversation too. "All of them," Victoria confirmed. Jennifer nodded. "Then I'll set up the co-mentorship with Michelle for next week. In the meantime, I suggest you two take the weekend to process this. Monday morning, we start fresh with new structures. What happens between now and Monday regarding personal matters is your business. But come Monday, we need clean professional boundaries." Ryan left Jennifer's office feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him, like something that had been locked tight had suddenly opened, like possibility and terror were indistinguishable emotions. He returned to his desk, tried to focus on work, failed completely. At 5:30, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Victoria. Jennifer gave me permission to use your personal number for this one message. If you want to have that conversation, the real one, outside of office and roles, I'll be at Lincoln Park tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. near the Cafe Brower entrance. If you come, we'll talk honestly about everything. If you don't, I'll understand, and we'll maintain strictly professional relationship going forward. No pressure either way. This is your choice." Ryan read the message 5 times, his hands shaking, his mind racing through every possible outcome of showing up versus not showing up, of having that conversation versus leaving everything unspoken. He texted back, "I'll be there." Ryan didn't sleep that night. He lay on his futon, which he really needed to replace now that he could afford actual furniture, staring at the ceiling and running through every possible version of Saturday morning's conversation. What he would say, what Victoria might say, how honesty might destroy everything or build something new, how 8 a.m. at Lincoln Park might change his entire life or confirm that some things were better left unspoken. By 7 a.m., he'd given up on sleep entirely. He showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater because this wasn't a work meeting and he needed the reminder, and drove to Lincoln Park through Chicago's Saturday morning quiet. The city felt different on weekends. Slower, more human, less driven by the relentless urgency that defined weekday rhythms. He arrived at 7:45 and parked near the Cafe Brower entrance, the historic building overlooking the pond where paddle boats sat dormant in early morning stillness. Spring had fully arrived in Chicago, Trees budding with new green, flowers beginning to bloom in carefully maintained beds, the air carrying warmth that promised summer wasn't far behind. Victoria was already there, sitting on a bench facing the water, wearing jeans and a lightweight jacket that made her look younger somehow, more approachable, less like a CEO and more like a woman waiting for a conversation that scared her. She turned when she heard his footsteps on the path, and the expression on her face was so openly vulnerable that Ryan's chest tightened with emotion he'd been carefully suppressing for months. "You came," she said, standing as he approached. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure. This is a lot to ask." Victoria gestured to the bench. "Sit with me?" They sat with careful space between them, not touching but close enough that Ryan could feel her presence like heat, like gravity, like something pulling at him with force he'd been resisting since December. The park was mostly empty at this hour. A few joggers on distant paths, a woman walking her dog near the pond's edge, but no one close enough to overhear. "I've been thinking about what to say all night," Victoria began, her voice quieter than he'd ever heard it. Practiced speeches, rehearsed explanations, trying to find the right words to make this make sense. But sitting here now, all of that feels inadequate. "So just say it unpracticed," Ryan said. "That's what you've been teaching me. Lead with truth, figure out polish later." Victoria smiled, small and sad. "Fair point." She took a breath, her hands clasped in her lap. "I care about you, Ryan. More than professionally appropriate, more than I intended when I approached you at that holiday party. More than makes sense given the complications. And I've been trying very hard to pretend that what I feel is mentorship pride or program investment or any of the safe explanations that would let me maintain proper boundaries. But it's not. It's something else. Something that makes me think about you at inappropriate hours and compose emails I never send and look forward to Tuesday mornings in a way that has nothing to do with professional development." Ryan's breath caught. Hearing her say it out loud, confirming what he'd suspected but never been certain of, felt like standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying. "I know the power dynamics are complicated," Victoria continued. "I know I'm your CEO, that I control resources and opportunities that affect your life, that any relationship between us would start from fundamentally unequal footing. Jennifer's right to be concerned. Dr. Chen is right to warn you about transference. Every rational part of me knows this is a terrible idea, with potential to damage both of us and the program we've built. But," Ryan prompted because he could hear the word coming, "but I can't stop feeling what I feel. And I don't want to spend the next year or 5 years or however long working with you while pretending this doesn't exist, while carefully maintaining distance that feels increasingly dishonest, while building something professionally meaningful that's undermined by personal denial." Victoria finally turned to look at him directly. "So I'm asking what you want, Ryan, not what's safe or appropriate or strategically sound. What do you actually want?" Ryan looked out at the pond, watching morning light play across water that reflected clouds and sky and possibility. What did he want? The question was simultaneously simple and impossibly complex. "I want to stop pretending," he said finally. "I want to stop analyzing every interaction to make sure I'm maintaining proper professional distance. I want to stop second-guessing whether what I'm feeling is real or just gratitude or transference or some combination that therapy can't untangle." He turned to face her. "I want to find out what this could be if we stop being so careful, and I know that's selfish and potentially destructive and maybe the stupidest thing I could say given everything you've done for me. But you asked for honest, so that's honest." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said something Ryan hadn't expected. "I want that too. But wanting something and being able to have it aren't the same thing. The obstacles are real, Ryan. The power differential, the program integrity, the professional consequences if this goes badly. We can't just ignore those because we have feelings. I'm not suggesting we ignore them. I'm suggesting we navigate them deliberately instead of pretending they don't exist." Ryan shifted on the bench, turning to face her more fully. "Jennifer said we needed to address personal feelings separately from professional relationship. So let's do that. Let's figure out what this is, what we are, outside of office and roles and program dynamics. And then we can make informed decisions about how to handle the professional component." "How do we do that?" Victoria asked. "We can't exactly date normally when I'm your CEO." Maybe we can't date normally, but we can be honest. We can have conversations like this one, outside work contexts, where we're just two people trying to figure out if what we're feeling is real and sustainable. Ryan's voice steadied as he articulated what had been forming in his mind. We can take time to actually know each other beyond mentorship and crisis management. And if what we discover is that this is transference or gratitude or circumstances rather than something genuine, then we'll know that, and we can adjust accordingly. And if it is something genuine, Victoria asked softly, then we deal with the complications honestly. We disclose to HR, we establish appropriate reporting structures, we accept whatever professional consequences come from being transparent about the relationship. Ryan met her eyes. But we do it from a foundation of actually understanding what we're navigating, not from a place of suppressed feelings and careful avoidance. Victoria absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. A jogger passed on the path behind them, footsteps rhythmic against pavement, oblivious to the conversation reshaping two lives on a bench by the pond. Okay, Victoria said finally, we try this. Carefully, deliberately, with full awareness of risks and complications. We take time to figure out what this is outside of professional context, and we're honest with each other and with Jennifer about what we're doing. She paused. But Ryan, I need you to promise me something. What? If at any point you feel pressured or coerced or like you can't say no because of our professional relationship, even if I'm not intentionally creating that pressure, you tell me immediately. Because the thing I'm most afraid of is that the power I hold over your career could make you feel obligated to pursue something personal when you'd rather not. That would be unforgivable. I promise, Ryan said. And I need you to promise something too. What? That you won't sacrifice your career or the program to protect me. If this goes sideways, if the board reacts badly, if there are professional consequences, I need to know you'll prioritize the work over protecting me from fallout. Ryan's voice was firm. You've built something important, Victoria. Something that's helping people who really need it. I won't be the reason that gets destroyed. I promise, Victoria said, though Ryan could see the conflict in her eyes, the tension between wanting to protect him and knowing he was right. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they'd agreed to settling between them. It wasn't a declaration of love or commitment to relationship. It was something more tentative and honest than that. An acknowledgement that they needed to explore what existed between them, that careful avoidance hadn't been working, that navigating complications required first understanding what they were navigating toward. So what now? Ryan asked. How do we do this? Victoria smiled, tentative but genuine. I have no idea. I've never tried to date someone who works for me while maintaining professional boundaries and protecting program integrity and managing board expectations. Not exactly a situation with established protocols. Maybe we start simple, Ryan suggested. Have coffee sometime when it's not 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Have conversations that aren't about project metrics or career development. Learn things about each other that have nothing to do with Horizon Digital Systems. He paused. Find out if we actually like each other beyond the context that brought us together. I already know I like you, Victoria said quietly. That's the problem. Then maybe the question is whether I'm interesting enough outside of crisis and professional growth to sustain actual relationship. Ryan kept his tone light, but underneath was genuine uncertainty. What did he have to offer Victoria beyond being her success story? Beyond being evidence that her program worked? Ryan, Victoria said, reading his expression with the same perception she'd shown since that first night in the bathroom. You're not just my project. You're not just evidence of program success. You're someone who survived impossible circumstances with grace, who learned and grew and helped build something that's changing other people's lives. You're thoughtful and strategic and funnier than you give yourself credit for. And you see me, really see me, in a way most people don't. That's not nothing. Ryan felt something unlock in his chest, some fear he'd been carrying that he was only valuable for what Victoria had made him rather than who he actually was. Okay, he said. Coffee sometime. Real coffee, not crisis management coffee. Just two people talking. Tuesday night? Victoria suggested. After work, separate from anything professional. There's a place in River North I like, quiet enough for actual conversation. That's 4 days away, Ryan said. Victoria smiled, more relaxed now. Good things are worth waiting for, and honestly, I need those 4 days to process what we just agreed to tell Jennifer we're moving forward with this exploration, to figure out how to navigate Monday's return to professional structure when everything feels different now. She was right. They needed space to adjust, to integrate what had shifted between them on this bench in Lincoln Park, while spring morning unfolded around them. Ryan stood, offering his hand to help Victoria up, a gesture of courtesy that became something more when her hand slipped into his, warm and real, the first deliberate physical contact they'd allowed themselves. She stood, but neither of them released the contact immediately, that simple hand-holding, carrying weight that transcended its physical form. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said. "For being honest. For being willing to try this despite all the very good reasons not to. Thank you for not giving up on me back in December when it would have been easier to just let me fail quietly." Ryan squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "I'll see you Tuesday evening?" "Tuesday evening," Victoria confirmed. They walked back to their cars separately, maintaining appropriate distance, two people who just agreed to navigate impossible complications together. Ryan drove home feeling lighter than he had in weeks, the constant tension of suppressed feelings replaced by something cleaner. Anticipation mixed with uncertainty, but honest uncertainty rather than denial. Monday morning arrived with new structures in place. Michelle Santos met with Ryan at 8 a.m. to discuss the co-mentorship arrangement, her approach characteristically direct. "Victoria briefed me on the program and your progress," Michelle said in her 26th floor office. "Impressive work, particularly the mid-market analysis. But she's also been honest that your mentorship relationship has developed complexity that requires additional support structure. That's where I come in." "I appreciate you taking this on," Ryan said. "It's not a burden. You're talented, you're responsive to coaching, and frankly, I think you have executive potential if you continue developing strategically." Michelle's expression was warm but businesslike. "My mentorship style is different from Victoria's. She's more hands-on, more focused on the relational aspects of development. I'm going to push you harder on the operational side. How to build teams, how to manage budgets, how to navigate organizational politics. Consider us complementary rather than redundant." They established a schedule, bi-weekly meetings on Thursday afternoons, focused on practical leadership skills and organizational navigation. Michelle was clear about boundaries. Their relationship would be strictly professional, focused entirely on career development, with no personal entanglements or emotional complexity. It was exactly what Ryan needed. Victoria had provided the foundation, teaching him to think strategically, to communicate effectively, to believe in his own capability. Michelle would build the next layer, teaching him to operate at scale, to lead rather than just contribute, to navigate executive landscapes. Together, they provided comprehensive development that no single mentor could offer. Tuesday evening arrived with an anxiety different from professional stress, the nerves of anticipation rather than fear of failure. Ryan left the office at 5:30, went home to change into clothes that weren't quite date-appropriate but weren't quite casual either, and drove to River North wondering what conversation with Victoria would look like when it wasn't structured around quarterly objectives and performance metrics. The coffee shop Victoria had suggested was tucked into a side street, small and warmly lit, the kind of place that prioritized atmosphere over efficiency. She was already there when Ryan arrived at 6:15, seated at a corner table with 2 cups already ordered, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look like someone who might be an artist or a writer rather than a CEO responsible for thousands of employees. "You remembered how I take my coffee," Ryan said, sliding into the seat across from her and noticing she'd ordered it exactly right, black with 1 sugar, the way he'd been drinking it since the first Tuesday morning meeting. "I pay attention," Victoria said simply. "How was your first session with Michelle?" "Good. Different from working with you, but good. She's going to push me on operational leadership, the stuff you don't focus on as much." Ryan took a sip of coffee. "It feels right, having both perspectives. That was the goal. And honestly, it takes some pressure off me to be everything you need professionally. Michelle's better equipped to teach certain skills than I am." Victoria wrapped her hands around her own mug. "So, coffee outside of crisis and career development. Where do we start?" "Tell me something I don't know about you," Ryan said. "Something that wouldn't come up in a Tuesday morning meeting or a performance review." Victoria considered this, her expression thoughtful. I paint. Badly, but persistently. Every Sunday morning, I spend 3 hours in my apartment with terrible acrylic paints and canvas, trying to capture something I can never quite get right. I'm not good at it, probably never will be, but I keep doing it because it's the only time in my week when I'm allowed to be comprehensively bad at something without consequences. Ryan smiled at the image. Victoria Hale, ruthlessly efficient CEO, spending Sunday mornings making bad paintings in deliberate embrace of incompetence. What do you paint? Abstract mostly, sometimes landscapes that turn abstract because I can't make them look like actual places. I'm very good at executing vision when it comes to business. Apparently that skill doesn't transfer to visual arts. She paused. Your turn. Tell me something I don't know. I used to write poetry in college, not good poetry, melodramatic stuff about meaning and existence and all the things 19-year-olds think are profound. But I loved it, the way words could fit together to create something that felt true even when it wasn't literally accurate. Ryan felt slightly embarrassed admitting this. I haven't written anything in years. Life got too busy, too focused on practical matters. But sometimes I still think in poetic rhythms when I'm stressed. You should start again, Victoria said. Writing, I mean. Not because you need to be good at it, but because you clearly loved it. We sacrifice too much in the name of practicality. They talked for 2 hours, coffee growing cold and being replaced with fresh cups, conversation ranging across topics that had nothing to do with Horizon Digital Systems. Ryan learned that Victoria had a younger sister in Seattle who ran a nonprofit, that she'd wanted to be a marine biologist before discovering she was terrible at science, that she'd lived in 7 different cities before settling in Chicago and still sometimes woke up disoriented about where she was. Victoria learned that Ryan had grown up in suburban Milwaukee, that his parents were still married after 33 years and constantly baffled by their son's career in corporate technology, that he'd once driven cross-country alone after grad school and still considered it one of the best decisions he'd made. They discovered unexpected overlap. Both preferred fall to any other season. Both had complicated relationships with ambition that drove them forward while also exhausting them. Both believed that kindness was underrated as a leadership quality. They found differences too. Victoria was methodical and planned every detail while Ryan tended toward spontaneity. Victoria loved classical music while Ryan preferred jazz. Victoria was an early riser while Ryan would sleep until noon given the opportunity. But the differences felt complementary rather than divisive, pieces that might fit together interestingly rather than sharp edges that would cut. This is nice, Victoria said as the coffee shop began preparing to close at 8:30. Being here with you without agenda or structure, just talking. It is, Ryan agreed. Though I'll admit I'm slightly terrified that tomorrow morning I'll walk into the office and won't know how to interact with you properly. Like we've crossed some line that makes professional interaction impossible. I've been thinking about that too, Victoria said, and I think the answer is we're very deliberate about separation. At work, we're colleagues. You're a program participant, I'm CEO. Michelle is your primary mentor now. We maintain appropriate boundaries, we keep communications professional, we don't let personal feelings bleed into professional context. Outside work, we're two people figuring out if this connection is real and sustainable. That sounds reasonable in theory. Do you think we can actually do it? I don't know, Victoria admitted, but I think we have to try. Because the alternative is either ending all contact, which neither of us wants, or letting everything blur together until we can't distinguish personal from professional, which would be worse for everyone. They left the coffee shop together, standing on the River North sidewalk in evening warmth while the city moved around them, couples walking hand in hand, groups heading to dinner, professionals ending workdays and beginning whatever came after. For a moment, Ryan wondered if he should kiss her goodbye, if that was expected or wanted or too much too soon. Victoria solved the dilemma by pulling him into a brief hug, warm and genuine but not lingering, appropriate for two people who were more than colleagues but not yet fully something else. Same time next week? She asked when she stepped back. Same time, Ryan confirmed. The pattern they established over the following weeks was deliberate compartmentalization. At Horizon Digital Systems, they were professional, Ryan reporting to Michelle for mentorship, Victoria overseeing the program broadly, but not engaging with Ryan more than any other participant. They were cordial in elevators, appropriately distant in meetings, careful about email communications that were always brief and copied to relevant parties. Outside work, they met Tuesday evenings for coffee or dinner or walks through Chicago neighborhoods, gradually building a relationship that existed independently of crisis and rescue and professional development. They talked about books and politics and childhood and dreams, about what they wanted from life beyond career success, about fears they rarely admitted to anyone else. Ryan learned that Victoria's driven ambition came partly from growing up watching her mother work 3 jobs to support 2 daughters, that her commitment to the mentorship program was rooted in understanding what lack of support had cost her family, that she sometimes felt like an imposter despite her success. Victoria learned that Ryan's relationship with Sarah had been comfortable but not passionate, that he'd been drifting toward a life he didn't want when crisis had paradoxically provided opportunity for change, that his biggest fear wasn't failure but insignificance. They were careful about physical contact, holding hands sometimes during walks, brief hugs at greeting and parting, nothing more intimate despite increasing desire. The restraint was deliberate, both of them knowing that rushing toward physical relationship would complicate emotions already complex enough. By early July, Jennifer requested a check-in meeting with both of them, assessing how the new structures were working. From an HR perspective, everything looks appropriate, Jennifer said in her office, reviewing documentation on her tablet. Professional communications are properly structured, the co-mentorship is functioning well, program integrity appears intact, Ryan's performance continues to be excellent, Victoria's time allocation across participants is balanced. But, Victoria prompted, hearing the implied qualification, but I'm also aware that you're seeing each other outside work. That's not a policy violation. You're both adults. You're being appropriately discreet. You've been transparent with me about what you're doing. However, we're approaching a point where we need to formalize this. Formalize how? Ryan asked. If your relationship continues developing beyond casual dating, if it becomes serious or exclusive or moves toward commitment, we need official disclosure to the board. Not for approval necessarily, but for transparency and to establish appropriate governance around the potential conflict of interest. Jennifer's tone was matter-of-fact. The board already knows the mentorship program involves close working relationships. They don't know about the personal component, and that's fine for now. But if things progress, hiding it becomes untenable. Victoria and Ryan exchanged glances, an entire conversation happening in that brief eye contact. We're not there yet, Victoria said carefully, but if we get there, we'll disclose properly. You have my word. That's all I'm asking, Jennifer said. Continue what you're doing. Be careful, be honest with each other, and be aware that at some point this stops being a private matter and becomes something the company needs to know about. That conversation prompted a different one between Ryan and Victoria the following Tuesday evening, walking along the lakefront while summer sunset painted sky in oranges and purples. Jennifer's right that we need to think about where this is going, Victoria said. We've spent 2 months having coffee and learning about each other, which has been wonderful. But we're also in a holding pattern, neither of us wanting to push forward too fast because of complications, but also not wanting to stay in indefinite ambiguity. What do you want? Ryan asked, the same question she'd posed to him that morning in Lincoln Park, but with different weight now that they knew each other better. Honestly, I want to stop being so careful. I want to actually be with you instead of dancing around being with you. I want to introduce you to my sister when she visits next month and not have to explain that we're figuring things out. I want to stop compartmentalizing my life into work Victoria and personal Victoria and acknowledge that those aren't really separate people. She stopped walking, turning to face him, with the lake stretching behind her. But I also know that actually being together means disclosure and board meetings and professional consequences we can't fully predict. So I'm asking if you're ready for that. If what we have is worth the complications it's going to create. Ryan looked at her. Victoria Hale, who'd seen him drowning and thrown him a lifeline, who'd taught him how to think strategically and communicate effectively and believe in his own capability, who'd been patient while he figured out whether what he felt was gratitude or transference or something real, who'd become someone he thought about first thing in the morning and last thing at night, someone whose happiness mattered to him in ways that went well beyond professional obligation, someone he wanted to build toward future with, despite knowing that future would be complicated. "I'm ready," he said. "I want this. Actually want it. Not as gratitude or because you saved me, but because you're someone I want to be with. Someone I want to know better and build something with and see where this goes when we stop being so careful about protecting against disaster." Victoria smiled, genuinely happy in a way Ryan had rarely seen. "Okay then. We tell Jennifer we're officially together. We prepare disclosure for the board. We accept whatever professional restructuring is necessary to manage the relationship properly. And we stop holding back," Ryan added, stepping closer, closing the distance they'd been maintaining for months. "We actually try this for real." "For real," Victoria agreed, and finally kissed him as sunset painted Chicago's skyline, and lake waves whispered against the shore, and something that had been building since December found its release in that single moment of connection. The board disclosure happened in early August during a quarterly strategy meeting. Victoria had prepared them in advance, conversations with key board members explaining the situation, providing context about the mentorship program, and how her relationship with Ryan had developed from professional support into something personal. Jennifer had prepared documentation showing that Ryan's success wasn't due to favoritism, but to measurable program effectiveness that was being replicated across other participants. The board's response was mixed. Some members were concerned about optics and potential liability. Others acknowledged that two adults in consensual relationship wasn't their business as long as proper governance was established. After 2 hours of discussion, they voted to approve the relationship with specific conditions. Ryan would report directly to Michelle Santos for all professional matters. Victoria would have no decision-making authority over Ryan's compensation or promotion. An independent HR audit would assess program integrity quarterly, and both would attend relationship-specific ethics training. The conditions were reasonable, protective rather than punitive. Ryan and Victoria accepted them without argument. The harder part was telling the broader company. Victoria sent an all-staff email in mid-August, brief and professional. She and Ryan were in a relationship. Proper disclosure had been made to the board. Appropriate professional boundaries had been established. The mentorship program would continue under Jennifer's oversight with Michelle as Ryan's primary mentor going forward. The response ranged from supportive to skeptical. Most employees seemed genuinely happy. They'd watched Ryan's transformation. They'd seen the program help Emma Torres and the other participants. They viewed it as evidence that their CEO cared about people beyond profit margins. Some whispered about favoritism or inappropriate relationships despite all the documentation showing otherwise. Office gossip flared for about 2 weeks before being replaced by whatever scandal emerged next. Ryan weathered it by focusing on work and letting results speak louder than speculation. His mid-market analysis had generated significant revenue increase. His consulting with James's team had improved sales channel effectiveness. His peer mentorship with program participants was helping others succeed. He wasn't Victoria's pet project. He was a legitimately valuable employee whose relationship with the CEO was properly disclosed and managed. By September, the relationship had become accepted reality. Ryan and Victoria were careful about public affection at the office, but didn't hide their connection. They attended company events together, had lunch occasionally in the cafeteria where anyone could see them, existed as both professional colleagues and personal partners in a way that felt increasingly natural. The mentorship program expanded significantly in Q3. 10 more participants selected through the framework Ryan and Emma had helped design, each receiving customized support and executive mentorship from various senior leaders. The program outcomes were remarkable. Retention increased, productivity improved, healthcare costs decreased as employees got proper mental health support. David Park's cost-benefit analysis showed the program generated positive ROI within 6 months. In November, Victoria was invited to present the mentorship initiative at a national HR conference. She brought Ryan with her, not as boyfriend, but as program participant and co-designer, someone who could speak to the experience from inside. They presented together in Denver, explaining the framework and outcomes and lessons learned to an audience of hundreds of HR professionals and executives. The reception was extraordinary. Multiple companies requested consultation about implementing similar programs. Harvard Business Review reached out about publishing a case study. Victoria and Ryan were interviewed for a podcast about innovative workplace practices. The program that had started as one CEO's attempt to save a drowning analyst had become a model for how companies could support employees through crisis while also generating better business outcomes. It proved that compassion and profit weren't opposed values, but interdependent ones, that investing in people during their hardest moments created loyalty and productivity that far exceeded the cost. On a Friday evening in late November, nearly a year after that holiday party where everything had started, Ryan and Victoria stood in her apartment overlooking Chicago's skyline. She'd invited him over for dinner, something she'd been doing regularly now that they weren't hiding their relationship, and he'd arrived to find her painting at the easel set up near her living room windows. "You're getting better," Ryan observed, looking at the abstract landscape that was less chaotic than her earlier attempts. "I'm getting more comfortable with being bad at it," Victoria corrected, setting down her brush, which might be its own form of improvement. They ate dinner talking about the program, about the upcoming board meeting where Victoria would request budget for 20 additional participants in Q1, about Emma Torres, who'd been promoted to senior analyst and was now mentoring 2 new program participants herself, about David Chen, whose mother's cancer treatment was working and whose financial stress had eased enough that he was laughing again. "I've been thinking about something," Ryan said as they cleared dishes. "A year ago, I was standing in that ballroom convinced my life was over. Couldn't afford rent, couldn't see a way forward, certain I was about to lose everything. And now I'm here, stable job, relationship with an incredible woman, helping build something that's changing people's lives. The difference is staggering." "Well, the difference is you accepted help when it was offered," Victoria said. "That takes courage a lot of people don't have. The ability to say, 'I'm drowning,' and accept someone's hand instead of insisting you're fine while going under." "The hand you extended changed everything," Ryan said. "Not just financially or professionally, but fundamentally. You gave me back the ability to believe things could be okay." Victoria moved closer, wrapping her arms around him in the easy intimacy they'd developed over months of carefully building relationship alongside professional obligations. "You gave me something too. Proof that the program I'd been imagining could actually work. Evidence that supporting people properly generates results that justify the investment. And personally, you gave me someone who sees me, really sees me, beyond the role and title." They stood there in her apartment as Chicago night settled outside, 2 people who'd found each other in crisis and built something real through careful navigation of complications that could easily have destroyed them. It wasn't a fairy tale. The board still scrutinized their relationship, office gossip still occasionally resurged, the power differential required constant mindful management, but it was honest and substantial and worth the effort. "I love you," Ryan said, words he'd been feeling for months but hadn't quite found the moment to articulate until now. "I know that's complicated given how we started, given all the dynamics we're still navigating, but it's true regardless of complications." "I love you too," Victoria replied without hesitation. "And yes, it's complicated, but the best things usually are." They stayed like that as the city glittered beyond the windows, as the program they'd built continued helping people who needed lifelines, as the foundation they'd constructed together, part professional, part personal, wholly deliberate, proved that sometimes the messiest beginnings could lead to the most meaningful outcomes. The story that had begun with a junior analyst checking his phone in panic at a holiday party, with a CEO who recognized drowning when she saw it, with a locked bathroom and impossible offer, had become something neither of them could have predicted. A program that would help hundreds of employees over the coming years. A relationship that navigated complexity with honesty and care, and proof that compassion in corporate environments wasn't just morally right, but strategically sound. In January, at the anniversary of the program's launch, the board voted unanimously to make the Executive Mentorship Initiative a permanent company structure with dedicated budget and expanded scope. Victoria gave a speech at the all-hands meeting announcing the decision. Ryan standing in the back of the auditorium, watching the woman he loved describe the vision she'd fought to make real. After the meeting, as employees dispersed and the auditorium emptied, Ryan approached the stage where Victoria was gathering her notes. "That was a good speech," he said. "You're going to change a lot of lives with this program." "We're going to change a lot of lives," Victoria corrected, pulling him close despite the few remaining employees who might see. "This was never just my vision. You helped build it, helped prove it works, helped design the systems that make it scalable. This is ours, Ryan, the success and the impact and everything that comes from it." Looking at her, CEO who'd taken a risk on a drowning analyst, woman who'd seen past his crisis to the capability underneath, partner who navigated complications with grace and honesty. Ryan understood something fundamental. The story wasn't about being saved. It was about being seen, being given tools and support to save himself, and then turning that transformation into something that could help others. That was the real breakthrough. Not one person's rescue, but a system that made rescue possible for anyone brave enough to accept help when they needed it most. And as Ryan and Victoria left the auditorium together, walking into Chicago's winter afternoon with the program they'd built now permanent fixture of company infrastructure, they carried with them the knowledge that sometimes the most meaningful change begins with a single moment of recognition. One person seeing another person's struggle and deciding it matters enough to do something about it. The rest, as they'd proven over 12 months of careful navigation and deliberate building and honest communication, was just the work of making that recognition sustainable, of turning one saved life into a system that could save hundreds, of proving that compassion and profit could coexist, of building something that lasted beyond crisis and became foundation for genuine transformation. That was their story. Not perfect, but real. Not simple, but substantial. Not a fairy tale ending, but an honest beginning that promised something worth building toward. And standing in Chicago winter sunlight, Ryan Mercer and Victoria Hale, analyst and CEO, mentee and mentor, partners in both professional vision and personal life, knew they'd created something that mattered, something that would outlast them both and help people they'd never meet, people who would one day stand where Ryan had stood and be offered the same impossible-seeming lifeline he'd been brave enough to accept. That was worth every complication, every careful navigation, every moment of uncertainty about whether they could make it work. Because they had. Against odds and despite obstacles, they'd built something real. And that was enough.